we're doing this again. Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and Merry Christmas to all of you. Hope you guys are all having a happy and safe holiday, whatever it is that you are doing. But yes, I am back here once again. And look, I will address the elephant in the room right away, as I've been doing in pretty much every video this year. I know I'm behind on things. I know that I have not really been as consistent with stuff as I want to, and I really want to try to make up for that. And the way to do that, I think, just to kind of get back into a sense of normalcy, because, you know, this has been a weird year for me, and I'll get more into it in my end of the year video and things like that when it comes to my reflect on everything. But I think the way for me to finally get back on track is by just getting back into doing a video that I was unable to do last year. And that, of course, is my Christmas movie reviews for 2023. I was not able to 2022, and honestly, I really was upset with myself that I was not able to do that video, because I always enjoy getting to do these, whether I'm talking about a great movie or whether I'm most of the time talking about not really great stuff. I still really do enjoy doing these. It's a good way to kind of do something that's related to Christmas, but also find a way to talk about some movies in a video in a briefer way than I would be able to. So, I think all around, this is a video that I always enjoy doing, and I'm excited to get back into doing so. Being said, this is probably the most amount of stuff I have ever talked about in a Christmas movie review. I don't know how long this is going to be. I have over 16 things to talk about, and I'll tell you guys right now, some of it, they're not all movies. I'm actually talking about a television series at the very end of this video with my girlfriend, so look forward to that. Everything else, though, is a movie, and I have quite a bit to say about the majority of them. So, we're going to go ahead and just get into it, starting off with the first movie. Okay, so the first movie I'm talking about is one that I think it really does need no introduction. It's a movie that I was planning to do an individual review for, but I just don't think it's going to end up happening, and that's for The Holdovers. And look, Holdovers, it's incredible. I'll say that right off the bat. It's every bit as amazing as everyone has been saying it is, and like I said, a movie I really want to do an individual review for, but I figured it's a Christmas movie, and I generally do feel this is the kind of movie that is destined to be a classic. I can just see a few years from now, people will be still talking about this movie and how it puts them in the Christmas spirit and how it's going to be, in their rotation films they watch around this time of year. I absolutely can see this film fitting that spot, but it also happens to also be one of the best films of the entire year. So I'm just very excited that I not only am able to talk about it in this video, but now I kind of have an even bigger avenue to talk about it with this being the Christmas movie review. Yeah, I mean, The Holdovers is just an incredible film all around. What this film does extremely well, I think, is it takes certain directions that you kind of expect it to. It takes certain story tropes that you've seen before. This story about this very crummy teacher who really wants nothing to do with his students. He doesn't really seem to enjoy his job very much, and he's now stuck looking after these students and things like that. These students that don't have a home to go to for Christmas, and he kind of has to now look after them. That idea we've seen done a lot of times before. Most of the time that is mined for comedy, and that is the case here. This is a very funny film. There are a lot of moments that very much did have me laughing pretty hard. A lot of moments especially that I really did enjoy in this film, especially early on. It's just some really great laughs here. But the film is not just that. This film is a lot more introspective than I think people are really kind of expecting it to be. I feel like this is the kind of film, like I said, you go into with a specific kind of expectation. And, I mean, they really do peel back the layers of all of these characters in such a amazing and just very rich way, whether it's the character of Angus, who at first seems like just this very sort of troubled, just kind of asshole student who doesn't seem to care much about anything going on around him, but has a lot of troubles going on back at home. There's a reason why he acts the way he does. There's a reason why he is so incredibly distant. There's a reason why he doesn't really seem to want much to do with his teacher at first and things like that. And his transformation throughout the movie is easily one of the most effective. There is a moment especially where we really start to find more about his home life, and I'm not going to get into it for those who haven't gotten to see it, because I do think this is a movie that is best to go into knowing as little as possible. Just really know what I told you. I think it's best to kind of just, do that. But God, his character is just incredible in this movie, and you really do find yourself kind of gravitating towards him, even if you can't relate to the situation that he's gone through. Obviously, there are people that I think definitely will relate to the situation he's gone through, unfortunately. But I think even if you don't, I think you can see Angus as someone who is just not really recognizing his true potential. He's not recognizing, what he really can be. He's kind of like, he's kind of like very lost in that way. And I think he just, as a character, I think he's just really incredible to watch throughout this movie. I think he is fantastic. I think his character is just so brilliantly well written, but easily the character that I think people will be talking about for years to come is Paul Hunnam. I mean, he is just such a incredible character in this film. Very early on, there are moments where we kind of see him teeter with the idea of love, whether it's romantically, whether that's in a friend way. He seems to kind of reject any sort of connection he makes with people throughout the film, and you're really trying to pinpoint what is he all about. Why does he act the way he does? Why does he shut down any opportunity he has to make some sort of bond with somebody, to sort of open up more about what he's going through? And there's a moment that happens about, I want to say, halfway through this film, where we find out something about him and everything just kind of clicks after that. And when that happens, Paul Hunnam becomes one of the most relatable characters of the entire year. I feel like we've all kind of been in a state like him, where there's something that has happened in our past that we deeply are trying to regret. And not only are trying to regret, we're trying to pretend it never happened before. We're trying to just repress it and push it away. And our way of doing that is by shutting every down, and that really just speaks to how incredibly written this character is. He starts off, and like I said, yes, he is just kind of the mean teacher. He is just kind of this, guy who doesn't seem to, want to befriend anybody, or doesn't seem to care about anybody, always seems to, always antagonize his students and things like that. But the more the film goes on, the more you really do understand where his head is at. And I think that his character is just so incredible in this film, and the bond between these two is just fantastic. I think these two just work so well together. But of course, from a performance standpoint, I mean, Paul Giamatti is just incredible in this movie. I mean, he absolutely deserves all the awards. I don't know who's winning Best Actor at this point. I don't necessarily care, because all the contenders, I think, are very much deserving of this. But he absolutely should be in that conversation. If he were to win an Oscar, I certainly would not be upset. By any stretch of the imagination. I think his performance is just remarkable here. There's so many things that he does with this character that I feel like a lesser actor would make this character just feel kind of generic, would just make this character feel a little too familiar in that way. But Giamatti is always adding interesting layers to him. It makes him that much more three-dimensional by the end of the film. As good as the writing is, I think one of the reasons we relate to Paul Hunnam as much as we do is because of Giamatti's performance. I think even early on, you can kind of see that there's something more going on than you don't really know what it's about, but as the film goes on, you to realize more and more about him. And I think the more you learn, the better his performance really does become. And I really loved what he was able to do here. And I think the way that he's able to kind of switch from someone who, like I said, is just very curmudgeon-y, really just detests each and every one of his students, to someone who, someone who is so much more complex and has all these different layers to him. You really start to find out more about Paul and why he really is where he is. And you also start to recognize that there's a lot of similarities between him and Angus, and their true connection is just so great here. God, Dominic Sessa's performance in this movie as well is definitely one that should not be going that should not go unnoticed. I have not seen enough people talk about his performance. I mean, I have, but not to the extent of Paul Giamatti and also Divine Joy Randolph, who we'll talk about in a little bit. But his is just fantastic here, especially for someone who has never acted in a major film before. He's mainly just done like theater acting in school and things like that. I mean, this is like the definition of just the kind of breakthrough performance you always hope to give, and that's exactly what Sessa does here. He is just fantastic. He holds his own against Giamatti. The two of them have such a natural chemistry. But again, it's the way he's able to bring Angus to life. Angus never feels just like this bratty teenage, this sort of like spoiled, stuck up teenager. He's so much more than that. He's so much more closed off, so much more emotional. There's so much more that he's going through, and it really is due to Sessa's performance. He is just fantastic in this movie, and I really loved what he ended up doing here. But Divine Joy Randolph is also just heartbreaking in this movie. Oh my God. I don't want to get much into her character because there's a things I didn't know about her character going in, but she is having a very tough time celebrating the holidays. This is a very sort of rough Christmas for her. She's gone through a tragedy of her own, and the way that she portrays the character of the way she portrays the character of Mary, I think, is incredible, because Mary's someone who seemingly seems to have her shit together. She seems to be someone that is just very, welcoming and warm and things like that. She's also the head cook, but she also is going through a lot on her own. And there's a scene in this film, it takes place at a Christmas party, where she just kind of unleashes all the sort of pent-up sadness and all the emotion that she's dealing with, and it is among the best scenes I have seen so far this year. It might be the highlight scene of the entire movie. I mean, she just kills it in this film. I absolutely would love to see her get a Best Actress nomination and even a win. I think she is just fantastic in this movie. I've always loved Divine Joy Randolph, but I do think this might just be her best performance to date. I just really love what she was able to do in this film. And again, I think having the smaller cast that they do in this movie, it makes the film that much better, because of the fact that, they don't have to deal with so many different characters. We really do get a chance to peel back the layers of all three of them. And you really do see that, like, yes, there's obviously different circumstances that they're all going through, but there are a lot of similarities there. And I think it really is just due to how brilliantly written all three of these characters are. So yeah, David Hemmingson's it's just one of the best of the entire year. Absolutely deserves all the nods, all the accolades it's going to get. It's just fantastic all around. We got to talk about Alexander Payne's directing, because he has not made a movie since Downsizing, and my God, you can see how much he has, how hard he worked in trying to make this film something just original and fresh, and I think he communicates all of that so well in this movie. I think, especially from a vision perspective, I mean, he just does such a great job with this. Yes, the movie can kind of feel like a throwback to like coming of age films that we don't really these days, but it also feels like something different entirely. Like I said, it doesn't go in the directions that you're kind of expecting it to, and I feel like that's what makes this film so incredible, is that Payne really just did this great job of taking this, what could have been a very like by the numbers comedy of just these two unlikely, these two people who don't really like each other, and them, slowly forming this bond and making it so much more than that. The way he's able to seamlessly blend this just fantastic comedy, like I said, the film, yes, it does get very emotional, but it is very hilarious at points. There's a lot of moments here that had me just absolutely dying of laughter, and I thought there were so many moments that were just so funny in this movie. But then also have, again, this incredibly emotional and just genuine sense of heart. I mean, he just such a fantastic job with that, and I think this is easily one of his best directed films to date. But also his commitment to make this feel like the 70s, not just feel like it takes place in the 70s, but also feel like it was made in the 70s. I mean, the movie wasn't shot on film, but you almost are convinced it was, because again, his dedication to this movie, what he's able to do. The movie literally starts with the type of logos you would have seen in the 70s. It's just incredible the way he was able to do all that. And yes, that is of course kudos to the cinematography as well, but I don't think the style and the feel of this movie would be the same if Payne was not behind it. And it really just shows how a director's vision can completely elevate an already great project. And I think that's exactly what happened here. I think Payne just really just kind of knocked it out of the park in terms of what he wanted to accomplish. And this time, he really was able to craft something really special. And I really love what he was able to do here. The score as well, it doesn't show up that often, but when it's here, it's really great. And the editing, I do think the movie is very well paced for the most part. It's just over 2.5 hours, and honestly, I think it's paced pretty well. The only real issue I do have with this movie, and there really isn't too many, to be honest, the only real issue I do have is the beginning of the film. There are, like I said, we are mostly confined to the 3 characters, but the beginning, there are other characters that we're kind of sing on, and there are certain arcs that are set up, and I just wanted to see a little bit more from them. There's one character in particular, one of the students we end up following, who I kind of felt like was someone that was a little bit sympathetic. I was like, okay, I kind of like this character. I want to see more of what they're going to do with him, and they don't really do all that. Very quickly, a lot of the students, they end up leaving the movie at one point, and they do come back a little bit later on. It's not like they're gone forever. But most of the movie is centered around these 3 characters and, them getting to understand each other more on her level and really getting to sort of understand the understanding the troubles that they've had within their lives and things like that. And while that's all very effective, I just wish they would have done a little bit more with some of the other characters in the first to the movie, so it would have been that much more satisfying. But really, other than that, I mean, this is just everything that I really could have wanted it to be. It's so incredibly effective. It's uproariously funny at points. It has 3 of the best performances of the entire year. Paul Giamatti, Divine Joy Randolph, and Dominic Sessa all should be the Oscar conversation for sure. They're already getting awards consideration, things like that, but they absolutely should be. Some of them I think should even potentially win. Alexander Payne's directing is just fantastic here. His vision, the way he commits to the 70s, it's just remarkable to see in this film. It goes in so many unpredictable directions that you wouldn't expect. And yes, like I said, the movie is very funny. It also has this beating sense of heart and this rawness to it that really just makes it stick out. And yet it still is able to give you that feeling of Christmas, that sense of joy, that sense of happiness. It still is able to give that to you. Even if the movie does have some really emotional moments, it still is heavily effective in what it's able to accomplish, and it's easily one of the best Christmas films I have seen in a very long time. This is destined to become a classic. Absolutely one of the best films the entire year. Holdovers absolutely gets an A. I'm so happy that I was able to talk about this film. It's every bit as great as everyone is saying. It's the kind of movie like you and you just really want to see it again immediately. And that's really just how I felt after watching this. Like, even though, yes, it's a Christmas movie, and I traditionally don't like to watch Christmas movies, when it's not Christmas. I just find it kind of weird. It feels like I shouldn't be watching this. This feels unseasonal. This is the kind that I would watch regardless, because of how fantastic it is. It's easily one of the best of its kind in a very long time, and I really can't recommend it enough. If you have not seen it, you need to check this out immediately. And if there's any film on this list that I recommend, it's this one. Please just seek this out as soon as you can. It is absolutely incredible. Right, so I'll be honest, the rest of the films I'm talking about, I probably don't have nearly as much to say as I did about the Holdovers, but I just really wanted to be able to talk about it. There's a lot of movies that I really do want to talk about, and that's one of them, and I just figured that it's a Christmas movie. There's no reason not to put it in here, so I figured I'd just go ahead and do that. But let's talk about the ones that I already planned to talk about in this video, starting off with It's a Wonderful Knife. And this is one that I feel like it just went under a lot of people's radar, and it makes sense. I did actually have a bit of a theatrical release, nothing really crazy. I remember it played in my theater, and it only played at one showtime per day, so it really wasn't there too long. I was never able to catch it in theaters because it was it literally left as soon as I would have been able to see it. But came on to Shudder, and I finally watched it, and it's decent. I do think that there is a lot more that it absolutely you can do with this concept, and I will say that is the main thing that brings this film down, is I think that the potential is certainly
better than what we get in this movie. But for what it is, I do think it still works really well. Right off the bat, I think the performances here are really good. James Whittup, never really seen them really in anything before, but I think their performance in this movie is definitely really good. You really do feel for the character of Winnie and what she's really going through, and I think that they command this film very well. They're very likable. You really find yourself latching onto them, and I think that they do a really good job here. Same with Jess McLeod. I really enjoyed her a lot in this movie. Again, not an actress that I've seen a ton of before, but I really did enjoy what we got with her in this movie. The character of Bernie went in a very interesting direction, not one that I really expected them to take when it came to her, but I really liked what ended up doing in this film, and I thought that she was really good. I mean, all the performances are really strong here. Joel McHale is playing a very different kind of character. He is not the sort of like quippy, type machine that he usually is. He is a lot more like the straight man here. He is very just like broken down and kind of, he's kind of broken down and stoic, and it's a lot more of a serious role for him, but he really does pull it off in this film. I've seen some people say that they felt he was a bit miscast, and that's all right if you feel that way, but I honestly thought he played this role very well. I really enjoyed what he ended up doing here. There's a lot of directions they went with him that I thought worked really well, and I really enjoyed his inclusion in the film. And then there's Justin Long, who I will say, I think for what he has, he is really good in this movie. I did feel he was a bit underused though overall, and I think that his talent weren't quite as effective as they could have been, but we will talk about that in a little bit. The central premise of this, I actually do think works really well. Basically, you have, this girl, Winnie, who saved her town from this killer on Christmas Eve, but she's always kind of feeling this sense of regret. She's feeling a sense of survivor's guilt. She doesn't want to be around. She feels like everything has become worse, through it. People are kind of saying that she's like this hero and she doesn't really feel like one. And so because of that, she makes this wish that she had never been born. And it does take this It's a Wonderful Life type approach. And from there, it takes a little bit of a different approach. Now the killer is actually alive and she kind of wants to stop the killer once and for all. And I think what they do with it, it does work pretty well. I think the issue I really had with this one is, one, from a comedic perspective, the movie is fun to watch at points. There's a really fun recurring joke with her mom in this movie and just how different her life is without her daughter there. And I thought that that was probably some of the funniest stuff in the entire film. I really enjoyed what they did with her. But other than that, I felt like the comedy wasn't really there as much as it should be. I didn't feel like they really leaned into it as hard as they could have. The movie is definitely more of this drama than a comedy, so I feel like it kind of being promoted as this slasher comedy, it definitely has fun moments, but it doesn't lean into it as hard as it could have, and that does bring the movie down just a little bit for me. And I think that's something that it just kind of comes up short with. But again, I think there's a lot of interesting ideas that they around with here. Her dad as well goes in a really interesting direction that I thought worked really well. There's some other twists and turns they take that I really did enjoy. And then there's the character of Bernie, who starts off, you think she's going to be like the Clarence of sorts of this movie, but they really take her in a surprising direction that I thought worked really well. It heightened the character of Winnie. It, they had this very unexpected development when it came to the two of them, and I really did enjoy that. I really enjoyed where they took both of these characters, and I thought it made it that much more interesting to watch, and I really did enjoy that quite a bit. In terms of slasher aspect of this film, I think the film very much does deliver on that front. There's a lot of savage kills in this movie. There's a lot of moments that I thought were very riveting to watch, and I thought they did a good job with that. It really is just, again, I think there's a lot of missed potential with this film. There's quite a few characters that I want to see a little bit more of, a few more ideas I really just want to see them lean a bit more heavily into. And so for a while, I really was unsure if I liked this or not, but I think by the time it ended, I really did end up enjoying it. I really like what the movie was trying to say. It actually ends on like a surprisingly uplifting note, which the way it ended was not at all what I expected it to go. That's not at all the direction I thought they were going to go with this film, and I thought it was honestly very interesting what they ended up doing overall. So Yeah, there definitely is quite a bit I do enjoy about this one. Again, I think the thing that brings it down is one, I think that the way they really focus on the time after she has defeated, this killer and things like that, it just feels very rushed. There are moments in the movie where you can tell that she just doesn't really want to be there, and you know exactly where the movie is going, and you're just kind of waiting for them to get there. And I feel like they could have done a better job in presenting enough obstacles for character for why she feels the way that she does, why she is in this environment, why things are the way they are around her. I just felt like everything kind of felt rushed there, and the movie didn't really pick up steam until we went back and we went to that alternate timeline. I think once we got there, the film really did take off and it became a lot better after that. And then there's also some characters that I really just wanted to see a little bit more of, especially some of our friends I felt were very underdeveloped in this movie, and they could have done a little bit more with them. But overall, I still really did enjoy this. I thought it was a very interesting take on It's a Wonderful Life. It's not at all just like a horror version of that story. Yes, it has similarities, but there's a lot of things it does differently here, and that's something that I really did enjoy. I think the way they twisted up the formula was really cool. I liked a lot of the central characters in this movie. There are some characters, like I said, I just want a little bit more from, including Justin Long's Henry Waters. He has a really great introduction in this film, and I liked what they did with him a lot. But after that, he's really not in the movie all that much, and I felt like he was kind of underused here because he's giving this like very goofy type performance that I think only he could really pull off, and I think he does a good job for what he has. But again, he's really not in the movie all that much, and I do think it does bring it down. I think if the movie was like 10 to 15 minutes longer, it would have been that much better. But for what it is, I did still really enjoy it. There's a lot of moments that definitely did stick out to me. So overall, It's a Wonderful Life. I'd give this one a B-. It's not quite as great as I was hoping it would be, but it still is a pretty fun time overall. Xmas was actually a lot better than I was expecting it to be, and I mean, that's mainly due to the fact that, like, the majority of the freebie films that I've seen have been relatively subpar to just extremely forgettable, but this one actually did have a little bit more to it. I think the thing that immediately stands out to me about this one is just the fantastic chemistry between Robbie and Leighton Meester. These two just work really well together. You really understand why these two were together at one point, but you also understand why these two are just detesting each other in the way that they are, and I think they do a really good job with that. Specifically, Robbie Amell is very good in this movie. I really enjoyed his performance a lot here. His arc of like what he's going through, why things ended, with his ex-girlfriend Allie in the way that it did, I thought was very effective. I thought it worked really well, and I really enjoyed his character. And like I said, just seeing these two and their detestment for each other, it works really well here. It never feels like it's played out. They're always kind of doing something different with it, and that's mainly due to this whole idea, the idea that she's coming to their house for Christmas, and she's celebrating with his family and whatnot, and the bond that they end up forming. There's a lot of funny situations that develop due to that, and the film really does take full advantage of that premise. There were a lot of really funny moments. There was a moment with a board game especially I thought was especially funny, and I really did enjoy that quite a bit. So I think that's definitely something that does for sure elevate this film for me. I thought the screenplay for the most part was really good here. Yes, it can get very predictable, but the movie does surprisingly do a good job of, again, delving into their relationship and why things turned out the way it did, and kind of giving us a sense of, where they're at in their lives and what things, what really could have happened, but also getting them to kind of learn things about themselves that I really did enjoy seeing. There's one direction the film goes in the third act especially, that I thought was very surprising. And I was surprised that it didn't feel tacked on. It didn't feel as hackneyed as I was expecting it to, and I actually thought it worked pretty well. So yeah, I did enjoy the screenplay quite a bit here. Aside from Leighton Meester and Robbie Amell, I thought Michael Hitchcock was also a really big standout. I really enjoyed his character. He says a lot of problematic things in the movie, but that's kind of like his whole shtick, and I thought it worked really well here, and I enjoyed his inclusion in the film quite a bit, and I thought that he worked really well in this movie. The directing from Jonah Feingold, I will say, is pretty basic. There isn't a lot that sticks out here, but again, I think for what this movie is, it definitely does end up working. That being said, the film is definitely not perfect. There are quite a few things that do bring this film down. One of them being there is this character, who is Graham's sister, Robbie Amell's character, Graham's sister in the film, and there is something we find out about her character that I thought was really interesting and I wanted to see more of, and I thought that they were going to end up kind of doing something with that later on in the movie, but they really don't, and I was really hoping that they would end up going back to it, and while eventually we get some kind of payoff with it, it just wasn't quite as heavily focused on as I wanted it to be, and I feel like they definitely could have done quite a bit more with her character overall. I enjoyed her in the movie. I thought she was definitely one of the more interesting characters, but I just want a little bit more with her. There's also a point in this film where both of our characters are dating new love interests, and I found both of them to be completely unnecessary. They don't really serve any purpose in the film whatsoever other than to make the other, like, jealous. That's basically the only reason that they're here. There's not really anything specifically interesting about them. There's nothing really that sticks out to me about either characters. Hell, the one that Graham is with, I mean, the movie practically forgets about. They don't do really anything with her whatsoever, and by the end of the movie, I just felt like the film could have still gotten to the point that it did without either of these characters, and I just found them to be kind of unnecessary. It feels like they're just here to kind of pad out the runtime because the movie doesn't have a ton to do with itself. It's very simplistic in what it does. Like I said, there are some directions it goes in that surprise me, but for the most part, it is relatively straightforward. But overall, I still found myself really enjoying this. I was surprised by how much I did like this movie. I found it very charming. I found it very funny. I really like the chemistry between both these actors. Yes, it can be very predictable at points, but again, it had a bit more going for it than I really did expect. And by the end, I was surprised by how much I was won over by just how genuine and just how, sweet and fun this ended up being. And so overall, I did really end up enjoying this one. So B for Xmas overall. Like I said, freebie films have not really been doing it for me, but thankfully this is the first one that actually did end up winning me over. Every single year, there's that one Christmas movie that I'm just, like, dreading to talk about and really just want nothing to do with. And unfortunately, this year, it is Best Christmas Ever. A movie that I do think actually had some kind of potential, but very, very, like, slim in terms of its potential. Let's just get into it right now. The best thing this film have going for it are the performances. I don't think really anyone is doing a bad job here. Heather Graham, it's really good to see her in films again. There's another movie that she had earlier this year that I'll talk about in another video that I very much recommend seeing over this one, but she is good for the most part for what she does in this movie. She does add a sense of likability to this character. She does add a sense of layer to this character that otherwise would not be there, and I thought that she does do a good job in this film. Brandy Norwood also is pretty good in this movie. She is someone that you do find to be very likable. You really do find yourself latching onto her performance, and I thought the two of them did end up really well together. And then Jason Biggs also I thought was really good. I don't know why he is restricting himself to these kind of films these days, because I think he's a much more talented actor than this, and I think he's proven that he is a better actor than this kind of stuff, but unfortunately, he does what he needs to do here, and I thought overall he did a solid enough performance. Unfortunately, the rest of this film is kind of a disaster. Right off the bat, the directing from Mary Lambert, it's just all wrong in this movie. I talked about earlier how when you have a film that involves comedy but also has some very heavy elements, you need to find a way to kind of find that tight balance, and clearly does not know how to do that. This film, in its first act, is incredibly mean-spirited. It's very unpleasant to watch. You don't find yourself really liking any of these characters whatsoever. And then as the movie goes on and it tries to develop more of a sense of heart, more of a sense of charm to it, you just find it to be very insincere. It just feels very forced. Like they kind of figured out that, like, oh, this isn't working, let's try to shift gears a bit, and it really just ends up falling flat. I did not enjoy the directing here at all. I don't think I laughed once in this movie, to be honest with you. There wasn't a single joke that really ended up doing much of anything for me, and I thought for the most part was just pretty dismal here. The screenplay, though, easily is one of the worst I have seen in any film this year. The plot of this film is so incredibly baffling to me, and I'll just say right now, like literally this movie, you have Heather Graham's character, Charlotte, who is so incredibly just like unsatisfied by her family, despite having this really good family life, despite really enjoying, despite having this very supporting husband, despite having these kids, she's just very unsatisfied by her life. And that would be fine if she didn't have this crippling obsession with the character of Jackie, her former friend that she kind of ended up falling out with, who is literally just sending her family Christmas cards, and for whatever reason, she's like really bothered by this. And that in itself is already like a really stupid and trivial reason for her to like dislike this woman. It's really dumb overall. But then the movie goes the extra mile and literally has her like share this house with her and basically try to prove that her life isn't perfect and her life isn't as idealistic as it is to kind of make herself feel better. And it is just insufferable to watch. This character is so incredibly detestable. I couldn't stand her whatsoever. Every single moment that, there's any sort of appreciation that she should show, she doesn't show it. There's never really a reason given as to why she feels the way that she does. She just kind of does feel that way, and it really doesn't end up working whatsoever. There's a moment in the movie where they kind of make you think there's something else going on between Jason Biggs and Brandy's character, and where they end up going with that especially was so ridiculous and asinine. And again, it's another instance where I feel like they realized that it really wasn't working, so they took this shift of sorts, and it really just ended up bringing the movie down that much more. Like I said, every attempt the film has in trying to be funny, it really just ends up falling flat. And so her character is especially just a huge reason why I didn't enjoy this. But then you have Brandy's character, Jackie, who, yeah, they do portray her as kind of having this idealistic lifestyle. She's very rich. She's married to, this guy, Valentino, who Charlotte may have some kind of obsession with as well. I don't know. Doesn't seem to know what to do with him other than he is her Latino husband who's very fit, and that's literally it. Like they don't know what the hell to do with him besides that. But yeah, she has this great life, so great, so rich and satisfied with herself that literally her youngest daughter already in Harvard, even though she's like, 12 years old in this movie? I don't know. The film thinks that's a really funny idea, never really explains how any of that's supposed to work. And again, I get that the movie is trying to be really, just kind of over the top in that way, but the movie doesn't really commit to that. It still is trying to feel surrounded. It doesn't really have some sort of established tone in that way, so it really does end up falling flat all around. But then comes the part of the movie where they actually do try to make you sympathize for Brandy's character and try to kind of peel back the layers of her. And the way they ended up doing it was one of the most emotionally manipulative and just out of nowhere sort of reveals that I have seen in a very long time. I found it so incredibly out of left field. Nothing really ended up working. The movie goes in this completely weird direction in the third act of the movie, and the whole thing just ends up crumbling because of it. And I already was really hating this movie a lot, but I would have at least liked if they had stuck to a tone. But the movie just completely shifts gears in the third act, and it just did not work for me whatsoever. So again, there's just very little about this film that ended up working. Not to mention there's this subplot of sorts involving the kids and them trying to prove the existence of Santa, and every time they cut back to it, I literally felt like I was watching a different movie. Like, I understand they wanted to give the kids something to do, but it didn't fit in with what was going on with the main narrative at all, and the way they tried to eventually tie these two together feels so incredibly flimsy and just it's so incredibly flimsy and inauthentic, and it just really ends up bringing the movie down. So yeah, I really hated this one a lot. Again, some decent performances here and there, but other than that, there really is not much this film has going for it. When people talk about these really shitty Christmas films on Netflix, this is exactly the kind of film that they're pointing to. It's mercifully short, and yet it still is so incredibly boring and just really hard to get through, mainly just because of how unlikable its central character is. And even though, yes, she does end up having an arc of sorts, it never feels genuine. It never feels like it's been, built to this. It never feels satisfying in that way. The whole movie just ends up crumbling and really just gets worse as it goes on, and by the end just ends up being one of the most unpleasant and just poorly thought out Christmas movies I've seen in a very long time. So overall, I could not stand this one whatsoever. Deep for best Christmas ever. Like I said, very good cast, but overall this was really rough to get through. Crashing Through the Snow is another one that I really did not know a ton going into, and while I really like a lot of what this movie is trying to do, ultimately it just really ended up falling flat. The two central performances from Ludacris and Lil Rel Howery, they're decent for the most part. Ludacris, I will say, as much as I have enjoyed him in other films, I don't really feel like he works as a lead in this movie. He just doesn't have the charisma or the energy to really latch you onto him, and overall, while I think he gives a fine performance in this movie, there just isn't a lot that he is doing here that really sticks out to me. The whole film, I kept thinking about other actors that would have done a better job with this, and I just felt overall he was kind of miscast in this movie. I wasn't too impressed by his performance. So there's some moments in the third act that kind of work, but overall, I just felt like as a whole, his performance just wasn't really working all that well for me. And then Lil Rel Howery, as much as I do enjoy him in this film, he just is Lil Rel Howery. You never feel like he is Santa Claus. He doesn't bring any sort of specific personality to the character of Santa, and it just doesn't really end up working as well as should. And their chemistry in the movie, it just isn't really all that strong, and so much of the film is contingent upon how much you care about their chemistry, and I just really found myself not caring whatsoever. I found it to be, again, just very forced, and I didn't really feel their bond throughout the movie. I actually found the best performance in the film to be Madison Sky Validum, who coincidentally was just in Best Christmas Ever, but I really did enjoy her performance here. You can see that she's someone who really wants to believe what's going on, but is having a hard time doing so, but also really forms this genuine bond with Nick, and their overall bond I thought worked really well, but it also gets her to kind of appreciate her dad more, and I really enjoyed her performance throughout the movie. I thought she did do a really good job here, but unfortunately the rest of this movie just really does not end up working all that well. I think the central idea that we have this guy who has just become completely disillusioned and just kind of, apathetic towards Christmas, really just wants nothing to do with it. He has no belief whatsoever. That is a really interesting idea, and there's a lot that you can really do with that, but this movie just never seems to realize its full potential. From the beginning, we get this extremely rushed backstory towards the character and why he feels the way that he does, and it was so rushed and just kind of quick that I literally couldn't tell you. It was so rushed and haphazard that I literally couldn't even tell you what the inciting incident was, what really caused all this to happen. And while the movie does eventually a little bit deeper into it, it just never really goes the extra mile in giving me a reason to care, kind of showing me where he's at in his life right now. It's just the kind of, story you've seen before. He's this workaholic of sorts. He doesn't really seem to care much about Christmas. He doesn't put a lot of care into his family. We've seen this character 1,000 times before, and doesn't really do a lot to make him stick out. And I feel like adding the character of Nick, someone who wants to, says that he's Santa, but, everyone is unsure if he actually is, and, what's really going on. There could have been a lot of interesting things that they do with him, and the movie just never really takes full advantage of it. I feel like for the most part, Nick is just kind of this very quirky character who is very obviously Santa, but nobody really seems to believe him just because the film kind of, demands them not to, even though it's super obvious what's going on. And I just felt like they didn't really, they didn't really take the time to dive deep into his character, and I felt like there's a lot more they could have done there, so that really didn't end up working for me either. But then there's this whole other side of the movie that almost feels like a completely different film, and it involves these villains of sorts, and I found these characters to be easily the weakest part of the entire film. There is zero given to any of them. The motivation they have for why they're doing what they're doing is especially really dumb. It doesn't seem like any thought was put into this whatsoever. It really feels like they're only here so the movie can have some kind of conflict, so the movie can have something for us to latch onto, so it doesn't feel completely aimless. And honestly, I think if you remove them from the film, I actually think the movie would have been that much more effective, because yes, they do end up contributing something to this film, but by the end, I really just found them to be kind of pointless. I didn't really feel like they added much to this movie whatsoever. The actors as well really just leave a lot to be desired here. I didn't find any of them to be interesting. I didn't find any of them to really stick out to me here. All three of them are just really overdoing it in this movie, and I didn't find them to be interesting characters. So again, that just really ended up bringing the film down for me. And again, they're supposed to be these, they're supposed to be driven by this motivation of sorts, and they're connected to what's going on, but when you eventually find out how they're connected to everything, and especially them keeping them separate throughout the entire movie, it just doesn't really end up working at all. So they really just end up bringing this down for me. Tim Story's directing as well. This kind of reminded me why I'm not really a big fan of him as a director, because I just don't really feel much energy. I don't feel like there was a lot of passion poured into this. It feels like he was given this project at the last second. He was told to direct it, and he just didn't really have much of an idea of what he wanted to do, because it just feels derivative of other Christmas films. And especially coming off the heels of a movie I really liked in The Blackening, I was expecting a lot more from him with this movie. But he just doesn't put forth a lot of effort, and that really just ends up bringing this down. I didn't really feel like there was a specific style. I didn't really feel like there was a specific idea that he wanted to do here. It just felt very reminiscent of other Christmas films that have tackled these ideas and done a much better job at doing so, and that just didn't really for me. The screenplay, like I said, also is just so incredibly lacking when it comes to both of these characters. There just isn't enough depth and nuance to them to really get me to latch on to everything. And while the movie is 91 minutes, it kind of struggles to figure out how to occupy that runtime and what it really wants to do. But it's not focusing on, like I said, the three antagonists in the movie. It really doesn't seem to have much conflict going on. It really doesn't seem to have much of it. There's a lot of just kind of dragging things out. We go to different locations and things like that. I mean, we've just seen this done so many times, and we've seen it done a lot better before. Comedy also just really falls flat here. I really didn't find myself laughing at anything in this movie. Nothing really stuck out to me in terms of that. And look, Lil Rel Howery is a very fun actor. I always really do enjoy him in movies, but here he's just not really bringing much to the table. He's just kind of being Lil Rel Howery, and I feel like him playing this character of Nick, I feel like there's more he could have done, and I don't necessarily blame him for that. I blame more the direction and where they decided to go with him, but overall, while I enjoyed him in the movie, he was definitely giving the most energy. I still felt like he was lacking with just how little he was given to do here. It's a very one-note kind of performance, and I just felt that, again, there was more that could have been brought to the table. So, yeah, overall, I was just really let down by this one. I felt like there was potential in the concept, but the movie just didn't really seem to know much of what it wanted to do with itself, and by the end, I just found it to be extremely very boring, and just really left a very little impression on me whatsoever. It's the definition of just a streaming movie that you watch and you just kind of forget about instantly. So overall, I really was not a fan of this one. C- for Dashing Through the Snow. Like I said, had some interesting ideas at first, but I really think it understood its true potential very much at all, and very much squandered, I think, what could have been a very fun Christmas film. The Naughty Nine was actually really good. Despite the fact this is a Disney Channel movie, I actually did enjoy a lot of what this film was trying to do. First of all, yes, we have seen this premise done before of this kid who doesn't get what he wants for Christmas, and he's put on the naughty list, and he wants to try to figure out what's going on, but the movie takes a very fun direction with it. It takes this heist sort of tone, and it really does end up committing to that. The movie is very fun. It has a very specific style and things like that, and I really did enjoy seeing it. The mission and kind of what they're all setting out to do and how they intend to do it, I thought was honestly very well laid out here, but I also really enjoyed the characters in this movie. There's actually a lot of depth given to the majority of them, of why they were put on the naughty list, and also maybe what they really wanted to accomplish on this mission. Maybe it's not just about getting off that naughty list, but also about achieving something else for themselves. For example, we have the character of John Anthony. He is this guy, he's this kid that's really good at making clothes. He's this, wants to be a fashion designer of sorts, but he also is someone that a lot of people seem to look up to, and a lot of people rely on him for that. And where they ended up going with him, I thought was actually really interesting. I really did enjoy his character and sort of the dilemma that he's going through. I thought worked really well in this film. Or the character of who is the best friend of our main character, Andy. I thought she also was a really good character. There's a really good moment with her, especially where we find out a bit more about her family life and what's really going on with her, and that's something that I just really end up appreciating in this movie, and I thought did work really well here. But then there's the main character of Andy, who I enjoyed quite a bit in this film. Yes, he is very mischievous, and yes, we have seen this character before, but the movie does do a good job of really diving into him and why he really is this way and what his overall sort of purpose is. And I thought Winslow Fegley, I've been a fan of him before. I think he's given some really strong performances in various films, but he once again proves just how much potential he has as an actor. I thought he did a really good job in this movie. You do find yourself latching on to Andy. You understand where he's really at. He's kind of at this point where, his parents just constantly are disappointed by him. They don't feel like they can rely on him. His sister is always looked at as, she's the golden child. She's always being lifted up. And he's kind of in this spot where he just feels like no matter what he does, he just isn't really appreciated in that way. And you kind of see him go through this arc of sorts of him trying to do that. And this bond he ends up forming with his sister, and the two of them sort of deepening their relationship as brother and sister, I thought was just really great to see. I really, like I said, enjoyed the amount of character that was paid to this movie. I thought at first that was something that was lacking, but I thought they did a good job when it came to him. And the character of Laurel as well, also I thought was pretty well written. She starts off, and yes, she's just the goody two-shoes sister, but there's a lot more going on with her than just that. There is, genuine dilemma that she is going through, and you actually do dive a bit deeper into that, and I thought that worked really well in this movie. So, like I said, I think character-wise, I think this movie is very strong. In regards to the comedy in this movie, I actually did find myself laughing quite a bit here. I was surprised by how much ended up working for me. I thought a lot of the humor ended up being very effective in this movie, and I really did enjoy the screenplay here. And the directing from Alberto Belli is surprisingly very inspired. The film really does take advantage of this heist sort of scenario, and yes, at points it can feel sort of like a ripoff of other films, but it never feels like it is trying to steal from them. It feels like it's paying homage to, certain heist films that we've seen before, and I think it does do a really good job when it comes to all of that, and that's something that I really did appreciate. The world building also is very strong. Once we get to the North Pole, seeing how all of that works out and their reactions to everything, it actually ends up being a lot of fun, and I really did enjoy getting to see all of that. I thought the score was really good here, and overall, like I said, I thought this movie just had a lot more going for it than I expected to. I think the things that do bring it down is it can feel very rushed. It takes about 10 minutes for them to actually establish the inciting incident, and I feel like they should have taken just a little bit more time prior to setting off on this mission and going on that heist to kind of, get us more invested in these characters. And while they do a better job, like once we get to the North Pole, for a little bit, it just feels a little bit rushed, and I wish they would have dived into some of the conflicts a bit more. Some of the other characters in this movie, I wish they could have done a bit more with. I think they could have dived deeper into some of them. And I think that does ultimately bring it down in some regards. And the way the movie ends does feel just a little bit rushed. I feel like there could have at least been like 5-6 more minutes of everyone and kind of following up on certain conflicts established earlier in the film. But for the most part, I really did end up enjoying this one. It had a lot more going for it than I did expect. And I think that's because I went into it expecting to just kind of find it to be very And by the end, I was won over by just how fun and, again, just style was given to this film. There's a lot of effort that's put forth, both character-wise, both in terms of the heist here, and also just the message that it was trying to get across. I think it actually does deliver quite well. So yeah, overall, I really did end up enjoying this one. B- for the Naughty Nine. It's nothing remarkable, but it certainly had a little bit more going for it than I did expect it to. Sticking with the theme of movies that surprised me, we have Genie, a movie that I went in kind of not really thinking I was going to like very much, considering that this is Melissa McCarthy and she's playing kind of a goofy role here, and that usually does not end up going very well. I feel like Melissa McCarthy is best when she's playing more sort of laid-back type characters. She's been how good of an actress she can be in that way, but here, I really did not think this was going to work, but she actually works very well as this character of Flora, and her genuine efforts to try to help the character of Bernard and what he's going through, and I thought that she actually fit this role very well. She adds a lot of layers I think other actors simply would not be able to pull off, and I really did enjoy sort of like what she's going through, how she got to this point. I thought worked really well in this movie, and I thought her performance was definitely very strong here. But also Papa Asidu in this film as Bernard, I thought was very strong in this film. He is going through quite a bit in his life. There's a lot of choices he's made that has kind of gotten him here, and you can see how deeply regretful he is, and seeing him making this genuine effort to try to reconnect with his family and try to make things right. I thought that, he did do a really good job. He absolutely is the heart and soul of this film, and I thought that he worked really well here. I really enjoy his performance in this film. Denise Benton also was a pretty big standout for me. I really enjoyed her in this movie. I've always enjoyed her in the things that I've seen her in, and this is another really strong performance for the most part. So yeah, I think the performances do actually work really well here. The directing by Sam Boyd is surprisingly actually very good. I think the comedy actually worked very well in this film, especially when it dives into some of the wishes that end up being made and the consequence of what happened. There's a lot of funny moments that really do end up delivering for me, but there also is this genuine sense of heart that I thought worked really well in this film. I really did find myself latching on to these characters and what they were really going through, and I think it's because it feels very genuine. It never feels sort of it never feels trite in that way, and I thought that the directing by Boyd worked really well. The screenplay is really where I have my main issues, because this film can feel very simplistic and sort of predictable at points. I don't think there's a single beat in this movie that you can't predict, and for some that definitely is going to bring the movie down. What really hinged upon me enjoying it was how much I did like these characters, and I like seeing what ends up happening to them, but it definitely did feel predictable, and that at points I did find myself kind of checking out. There's also certain characters I just wanted to see a little bit more from. The character of Mark Maron especially, I really liked him in the movie, but I feel like there was a little bit more they could have done with him, and I think that his character by the end just ends up coming up a little bit short. Same with Alan Cumming. I would have liked to see more of him in this as well. And like I said, there's a lot of tropes here that definitely can feel very derivative. The idea of this workaholic of sorts who just doesn't really have time for his family, and because of that, things are kind of strained and he's trying to make it better. We've seen this done 1,000 times before, but the movie still does a good enough job in giving us a reason to care, giving us a reason to latch onto these characters, and I thought that's something that did work really well. There's also this subplot of sorts that starts in the third act in the movie, and it just didn't really end up amounting to much of anything. It feels like it's going to go somewhere, and then it really doesn't, and by the end, I feel like they could have easily gotten us to that point without, doing what they were doing. So overall, that was something that definitely did bring the film down just a bit for me. But again, for the most part, I was surprised by how won over I was by this one. I found this film to be honestly very fun, very whimsical, really dived into, like I said, the ideas of wishes very well. I thought both actors worked really well off each other. They have a very genuine chemistry to them. And while, yes, it definitely does have some things that do feel predictable, do feel derivative, I still did really end up enjoying this one a lot more than I thought I was going to. So B- for Genie. It's nothing remarkable, but it certainly is a lot better than what I kind of expected to be. So, Family Switch, this is not one that I knew was a Christmas movie, going into it. So, I literally had this on my what I watched in November video. I was waiting to talk about it there. And then the beginning of the movie, they're literally singing along to like, they're literally singing along to like, Run Run Rudolph, and I'm like, oh, I guess this is a Christmas movie. Like, I literally had no idea. So yeah, it is definitely a Christmas movie, and it actually is pretty good. I can't believe I'm saying that because it's directed by fucking McG of all people, and I will talk about the directing in a little bit, but yeah, I actually did end up enjoying this one quite a bit. I think for a film, that is about like body switching and things like that, yes, we've seen this 1,000 times before, but the movie still finds something fun to do with that idea. I really like the idea this is happening to the entire family. They all have their own sort of conflicts that they're dealing with, and it actually feels pretty well fleshed out here. I think each of these characters, they have some kind of dilemma that they're facing. There's something that they need to overcome, and the movie does a really good job of kind of diving into all of that. It also helps that all 4 of these central performances here are great. They're all very committed to what they do. I think their performances as these characters on their own are good, but especially when they switch bodies, it's almost seamless, especially for Brady Noon. When he transforms into Ed Helms, it's like you don't even notice. It just feels like he gets right. You notice such a difference just by the way he talks, the way he's acting, the way that he is, the way that he gesticulates. I mean, he completely transforms into his father. You fully believe that he is, his father, and I think he does a really good job with that here. His performance really stuck out to me. Jennifer Garner as well. I mean, she's always great in everything that she's in, but I just really loved her performance in this movie, starting off as this very, like, strict, by-the-book, mother, but then becoming someone who is much more straight-laced and loose. I think that she just does a really great job with that here. Ed Helms, Emma Myers, all 4 of them are really great, and I think they absolutely make this movie. The chemistry between them as well is just really good here. Again, it just feels very believable, and I think they do a really good job of diving into these characters, and even when, yes, it can be a little awkward to watch at points, it still works because of the commitment that all 4 of them have, and I think that really does elevate this film for sure. In regards to the directing from McG, this is the one thing that does bring the film down. He's really not a great director. He has improved in some aspects here. This movie doesn't feel nearly as choppy as some of his other films. He still does have a problem, though, sometimes when it comes to tonality of his films. Sometimes this movie is really over the top and, has a lot of gross out humor and things like that. And then sometimes the movie is a little bit more laid back and tries to be a little bit more, tries to be a little more nuanced, and I think that he doesn't find as tight of a balance as he really could, and I think, like I said, while he is improving, this is absolutely like the best movie he's directed, he still isn't the strongest in terms of creating an overall style and having a consistent tone throughout his films. The film does struggle with that at points, and I think that's the main thing that does bring it down, but the screenplay is actually pretty good here. The one thing I really did appreciate, again, is how much time is put into getting us to understand these characters and what they're really going through. The character of Jess, for example, is someone who is so consumed by her job. She doesn't really understand much of what her daughter Cece is going through, and you can really see how her switching with her, kind of gives her that opportunity to learn more about Cece and really kind of understand her more. And then conversely for Cece, it gets her to, understand her mom more. And I thought they did a good job when it came to that central conflict and what those two are really going through. But I gotta say, I really found myself wrapped up in the story between Bill and Wyatt, especially due to, with the character of Wyatt. He is someone who is very socially awkward. He has a lot of insecurities about himself, and there's a lot of stuff that he is kind of unsure about, and he has a genuinely really good arc throughout this movie. I would go as far as to say he's probably my favorite character in the film. I really enjoyed what they ended up doing with him. I really enjoyed the direction his character went in. I thought that there was a lot of effort put into him. And then for Bill, he is someone who is really just trying to reclaim his glory days of sorts. He used to be this rock star, and he's kind of put that on the back burner, and we dive a little bit deeper into his character, and I think that, they do a really good job when it came to him. So I think all four of these characters are very well written, and I really did find myself liking all of them. And the movie also is surprisingly very funny. I found myself laughing at quite a few situations. A lot of it is, yes, the fact that they are switching bodies, and there are things that they're doing that are really funny to watch. But the film really does take full advantage of that, and because that, a lot of the humor does end up working very well in this movie, and I really did find myself liking a lot of the comedy here. There's a scene especially involving this presentation that Jess needs to give, and Jess is in, this is when Jess is in Cece's body, and Cece is in Jess's body, and that whole scene I thought was just absolutely hysterical. I loved where they ended up going with that. There's another scene at a party that I thought worked really well. So there's a lot of really funny moments in this film, and I thought the screenplay was very good here. And there's a lot of fun ideas as well. That they dive into, and I think there's a lot more you can do when it's the entire family switching bodies versus just one or two people, and I think that's what makes this feel a little bit more special. That's what makes this really kind of stick out, and I thought they did a good job with that here. The cinematography is really nothing special. It definitely has that like Netflix feel to it, and it just kind of feels a little bit cheap at points, but I think for the most part it's pretty okay. And then the score isn't really anything to write home about. I do think the movie for the most part is very well paced. I did find myself not being bored by anything. I found myself pretty locked into what was going on. I think the only other issues I do have with this movie, one, talking about it being a Christmas movie, it's kind of a stretch to call it one. Yes, it takes place during Christmas, but Christmas is much more of a backdrop in this film, and that honestly feels kind of like something they did at the last second. Like, they thought that this needed to be a Christmas film, they tacked it on at the end, and while there definitely is stuff that involves Christmas, it just never really takes full advantage of it. It feels more like a backdrop than anything. There's even scenes here that feel kind of at odds with itself. There are scenes where Cece is at school when it's supposed to be Christmas break, and it's kind of confusing as to why she's at school and then not at school. I think they needed to do a better job when it came to, if they were going to have this during Christmas, I think they really need to kind of double down on that, because it just feels a little bit misplaced at times, and I don't really understand why they decided to make that decision. Again, it just feels very like last minute to me where they decided to do that. And there's this whole running gag they tried to do involving the baby and the dog switching places, and while at first that's a really fun idea, they really don't do a lot with it. It's a very one joke type subplot, and I really wanted them to kind of dive further into it, because I feel like there was a lot of potential there, especially when it came to Matthias Schowager's character, who is looking after the two of them and kind of his reactions to everything. I just felt like that kind of got put on the back burner. I wanted to see them dive a little bit deeper into that. There's some other characters, especially in this character that Cece, especially this whole subplot with Cece and her trying to get into this school, I felt like that wasn't quite as dived into as it needed to be, and I felt that did bring the movie down a little bit. So, there are definitely some things that don't work quite as well as they need to, but like I said, for someone who went into this with very low expectations, considering it was a McG directed film, I really just expected this to be complete shit. I was honestly surprised by how much I did end up enjoying it. I honestly found it to be very fun. I really enjoyed the heart that was throughout this movie. I thought all four performances worked really well here. Thought there were some really fun ideas when it came to the idea of the family switching, of the body switching and things like that. The film really does take advantage of that. There are definitely some things that I wish they did a little bit more with, but for the most part, I really did end up enjoying this one. So B- for Family Switch. It definitely is a lot better than I expected it to be. It's nothing incredible, but certainly for what I expected to be and my rock bottom expectations, this one really did end up surprising me in a very good way. Hey, so remember that movie Silent Night that came out in 2021? Well, it turns out there's another Silent Night in 2023, and it's much more major. A lot more people saw it, and unfortunately, this one is not good. Is really not good at all. Listen, I had to make that joke. I'm sorry, I just had to. But I prefer Silent Night over Silent Night. I'll just say that right now. I'm not gonna make that joke again. It's stupid. It's only funny to me. But anyway, yeah. So Silent Night, I was really pulling for this one. John Watts is obviously a very acclaimed action director. He has not made a movie in quite a bit, and I was really pulling for this to be something special. The fact that this is the film that he was doing after so many years, he was really putting a lot of effort into it. I really thought this was going to be, something that just reminded us how great of a director he can be. Also kind of being this throwback to like Die Hard and things like that. And this movie just really did not end up working for me. Now, I will say right off the bat, I think there are some things going for it. Joel Kinnaman gives a really strong performance in this film, especially the fact that obviously the entire film he doesn't talk at all. There's no dialogue whatsoever, but the way he has to emote without any dialogue is very impressive. You understand what his character is going through. You understand the revenge that he's feeling throughout the movie. You really do find yourself latching on to him. And I thought he by far is the best thing about this movie. I thought his, acting was really strong here. I really enjoyed the commitment he had to this film, really transforming into this character that becomes increasingly hardened throughout the film due to the events that he's going through. I thought overall he just did a really good job here for the most part. The other actors, not so much. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then some of the action is definitely strong here. There are some action set pieces that definitely did stick out to me. There's this car chase of sorts that I really did end up enjoying. But other than that, yeah, this really isn't that great. And it sucks because I really do admire the fact this film is trying to do something wildly different. It is completely dialogue free, and that means none of the characters, have any lines of dialogue or anything like that. I think that's a really, good idea. But you have to have a story that makes that fits that style. And unfortunately, this is one of those cases where that decision just completely deflates the entire movie. And I hate saying that because I do think this movie has a bit going for it, but let me try to explain this as best as I can. I think for our central character, like the character that we're following here of Brian, it's fine. Like, I understand he's not supposed to talk. He has something that goes down very early on in the movie that makes it so he no longer has the ability to speak. That's fine. Joel Kinnaman does a good job in that performance. I don't really have a problem with the fact that he can't speak in the film. I think it honestly works for the character. It enhances the character. I think that works just fine. Unfortunately, that same, model is applied to every other character in this movie, and I just don't really quite understand it, because in doing so, it retroactively, rids them of any sort of nuance. Scott Mescudi, for example. I love Kid Cudi. I think he's a fantastic actor. He's proved himself in other films, especially, X last year and Don't Look Up. Like, he's a very strong actor. I've enjoyed what he's brought to the table in other movies before. Here, I don't understand why he was even cast in this role, because his entire character is literally just this police detective that is trying to investigate what's going on, but he also is trying to be this ally of sorts to Brian, and his entire character in the movie is basically just this. That's it. That's literally all he does in this entire film. And it just makes it so there's nothing to latch onto when it comes to this character. There's nothing for me to really get behind when his entire character is just reading stuff and reacting to things. Like, what am I even supposed to say when it comes to him? This also goes for his wife in the movie, played by Catalina Cedino Marino, who does give a okay performance, but really is never given any opportunity to focus on her own. She also is going through an insurmountable amount of grief. Remember, they've both lost their son in this movie. They're both going through a lot in this film, and when you don't give her any chance to try to speak or try to open up about what she's feeling, I never feel any real connection to her character. She really is just the concerned wife here, and it's unfortunate because I really do think there was depth that could have been given to that character, but again, because the fact that this character is never able to communicate it verbally, I have no way of knowing what she really went through, and so I don't think they did a very good job with that. The other characters in this movie I didn't find interesting at all. I found them all to just be very one notes and flat. And then the central premise of what's going on here, I don't think is a bad one. This whole story of sorts where, you know, this event happened on Christmas Eve involving the murder of his son, and he's now trying to get vengeance against, you know, them, I think works really well. But it takes so long for the movie to actually get there. So much of the first two acts is just building up to him training or seeing these endless flashbacks of moments with his son before things were better and how much happier he used to be, and then contrasting that to now visiting an empty room that used to be filled with life. Like, it just feels so repetitive and manipulative, and it's like, how many times are we gonna cut back to this, and are you gonna try to make me feel the same exact way? Like, I understand he's in pain, I understand he's suffering, but there were different ways they could have communicated it, and the movie just doesn't really try to do that. And what that leads me to believe is that the decision for them not speaking had to be something that they implemented at the last second. They knew that the script was very basic. They knew that the script was very bare bones, and they wanted to find a way to try to make this stick out, to try to make this feel like something a little bit more special than it was. And so they added this element of no dialogue to try to get people to, you know, to be more interested in this movie. But honestly, in doing so, I think it robbed the movie of its true potential. And again, I have no way of confirming this, of course. This is just pure speculation on my end. But I really do think this hurts the movie, because I think if they had not made this decision, I think there was so much more you could have gotten out of this, and it just really ends up sinking the entire film. And as a whole, and because of that, this movie is just a complete slog to get through, especially the first two acts. It is really rough to watch because there really is just nothing happening aside from the few things that I said. If we're not seeing Brian training, we're seeing flashbacks to, you know, him before his son was murdered, or we're seeing Kid Cudi, you know, read this evidence or read this book of certain things that these gang members have been involved in, and him trying to do something about it. Or we're watching his wife like text to him while he's kind of being distanced towards her. Like, it's the same kind of things over and over again, and it just doesn't really work overall. It really just ends up sinking this movie entirely, and it makes it so once we do get to the revenge aspect of the film, I just don't really end up caring that much anymore, because the film took so long to get there. You know, I really wanted them to go all out and really deliver with the action, but even that ended up falling flat to me. The way that it was done, it was just very unremarkable, very quick in terms of what happened. There were points in the movie where it didn't even really feel like Brian as a character was going through all that much in terms of the violence and the peril he was going through. It felt like he was kind of, you know, he was kind of okay. And then things do start to get a little bit more gruesome towards the end. But again, I just didn't feel that connected to what was going on. It also didn't help that the gangsters in question are horrible, are just terrible in this movie. There's one woman especially who I literally was laughing at because of just how terrible her line delivery was. And again, I don't know if the actress itself could be really good. It sucks that, you know, in this movie that she gave a really shitty performance, in my opinion. But it just really did not end up working for me whatsoever. So yeah, I was just really let down by this one. I was really pulling for it. I was really excited to see how this was going to turn out. But by the end, it just really left me feeling cold and really just made me annoyed by the choices that ended making. Similar to Family Switch, also, this film just does not do anything with its Christmas setting. At least Family Switch had some moments that were Christmassy. This one, again, it just feels like a last minute thing where it's like, okay, let's make this Christmas related so it can come out during Christmas and we can sell it as a Christmas action movie. This is not a Christmas action movie. The majority of the film doesn't even take place during Christmas. It's literally just like the last like 20 minutes and like the opening 10 minutes that actually have anything to do with Christmas whatsoever. And so if you're expecting this to be somewhat Christmassy, you're going to be disappointed because it really isn't at all. Yeah, Silent Night as a whole was just really disappointing to me. I thought this film had a lot of potential, but because of certain choices that it makes and certain directions that it goes, it just really ends up robbing the film of any sort of originality, any sort of vision that it could have had. And while I do really admire John Watts as an action director, and I do think there are moments this film does get to show his true talents and gets to show how incredible he is at helming action. There's only so much he can really do to save the film from the incredibly subpar and honestly just at points unwatchable script that really does end up being turned out here. The pacing is insufferably bad. The directions it ends up going, again, are just incredible, are just very derivative. The movie ends on a note that was just very unsatisfying to me. Overall, I just really did not enjoy this at all. So D+ for Silent Night, easily one of the most disappointing films of the entire year. Candy Cane Lane is a movie that I desperately want to like, but unfortunately, it just really does not end up working quite well for me. I will say right off the bat, one of the things that does absolutely elevate this movie is Eddie Murphy, and I say this in pretty much any film he is in. I mean, he's just such a likable and fun actor. He commands the screen very well. You really do find yourself liking Chris Carver as a result. He makes his character a little bit more, three-dimensional in that way, and I really did enjoy the performance that he was giving in this film, and he definitely does put forth effort that otherwise wouldn't have been there, and he's easily the best thing I think about this entire movie. I really did enjoy his performance in this film, and I do think there is some potential within this premise. Yes, we have seen this idea of, someone who is competing to put up the best Christmas lights and is competing with like a neighbor and things like that. We've definitely seen that done before, but this movie is trying to put a unique and different kind of spin on it, and I really do appreciate the fact the film is trying to do that. It is trying to do something original. It is trying to be really weird. Unfortunately, it just ends up coming across a lot more incoherent than I think it really needed to be. Right off the bat, I mean, the way this movie starts out seems like it's going to go in a very straightforward direction. You have this whole thing going on with these Christmas lights and how he is trying to put up the best possible Christmas decorations that he can, and then something ends up happening where this becomes a lot more detrimental to him, and he needs to kind of find a way to assemble the best possible Christmas decorations, and he does, but then things end up taking this much more wild turn, and once the movie goes off in that direction, it just kind of lost me from there. I understood what they were trying to do, but I just don't think this idea quite worked out in the way that they were hoping that it would. I think that the movie itself just really kind of goes off the rails after a while. It doesn't really seem to know what it wants to do with itself, and because of that, it just feels a bit more aimless than it needed to be, and I think that's really what ended up bringing this down. The idea of the 12 Days of Christmas and them coming to life and things like that, I think there is potential there, but the movie doesn't seem to know what that really means. What is that really all about? What does that entail for this family? What are they going to have to go through? All of that, it just feels like they made the most uninteresting version of that possible, and I really feel like they could have gone a lot more all out when it comes to the wild nature of this movie, because like I said, it is trying to be very weird and out there, but it never feels like it's fully embracing it. It feels a bit more stifled because the movie still wants to be relatively straightforward. This quest that Charlie ends up going down and his family, it's very straightforward. There really isn't a lot to it. There is a lot of exposition to get there, but once we get there, it's like, okay, we know exactly where this is going to go, and they don't do a great job with that. But the other issue I have with this film is that there's a whole other movie in there about this man and him trying to, become a better father, and these conflicts that his family's going through, and that part of the movie just feels like it doesn't really belong here, because again, the movie's trying to be all wacky and crazy. And the problem is when they do eventually focus more on his family, it just feels a little bit half-assed. They really didn't put forth as much effort into the character development as they needed to, because once the film is focusing on the quest, it is very much focused on just that. It doesn't really want to focus on the characters. It doesn't really want to take the time to slow down, and it just doesn't really end up working out because of it. And I think that really does end up bringing the movie down severely. And again, it sucks because it is trying to be really wacky and subversive, but again, the movie feels handcuffed. It feels like it's not allowed to be as weird and out there as it wants to be, and because of that, I just found myself kind of feeling just kind of meh throughout the movie. I didn't really find myself super into a lot of what was going on. It also doesn't help the fact that the majority of these characters I really just found kind of insufferable. The main family is fine. I don't really have a problem with any of them. But when it comes to any of the characters involved in this deeper lore, especially Jillian Bell, I really couldn't stand whatsoever. I am not a big... I've mentioned before how I'm really not a big fan of her as an actress. I do think she does have potential. She's impressed me in other films before, but this is when she is at her absolute worst. When she is playing these, like, off-the-rails, very over-the-top sort of supervillains, she just does not work whatsoever, and this is the kind of film that is just... There's way too much of her. She's really overdoing it, and it just was not working for me at all. They're trying so hard to make her just like the really snarky and fun villain, and it just does not end up working. So I really just did not find myself liking her character all that much, and she's also just very one note. Her actual mission, I don't really understand why she wants to achieve this goal. What is she really trying to accomplish here? Why is she so into what she's doing? I didn't really feel her motivation here, and because of that, the whole movie just kind of ends up sinking. There's some other characters that Chris encounters throughout the film that I just found to be kind of annoying here, and I wasn't super into any of them. The only one I ended up liking by the end was Trevante Rhodes' character. I thought he was kind of fun, where they ended up going with him, but the other characters here really did not end up working for me, and it just really ended up bringing the movie down. But there was a point in this movie where I was like, okay, it's forgettable. It's really not that bad. I'm not really a fan of what they're doing, but at least they are getting this done in a pretty swift and breezy manner. And there's a point where you think the movie is about to wrap up, and we're about to get to the point where the movie's going to get to its resolution, and then suddenly there is another conflict that is presented that was of great importance. It was like originally of great importance and wasn't before, and now suddenly it is, and it just felt like the movie is doing whatever it possibly can to drag this out, and it just really ended up pissing me off, because I was ready for the movie to wrap up, and especially with what they end up doing, it just feels so pointless by the end. Why do we even need to do this? Why do we need to go to this extent? I feel like they could have just wrapped up the movie in the same way that they did, and it would have been just fine. I don't really understand why we need to go through this whole thing. It kind of makes the, last hour or so of this film, that we saw prior to this feel kind of pointless, and I feel like they could have just gotten to that point, right away, and I don't really understand why they didn't. So, again, there's a lot of things here that don't really end up working for me. In regards to the comedy, there are some moments that I thought are pretty fun. Anything involving the Christmas lights competition and these two newscasters that we saw, they ended up working really well for me. I thought they had some of the funniest moments throughout the entire movie. There is a reveal of sorts, especially involving the competition, that I thought was really funny to watch, and every time they came back to it, I thought was really good overall. But then there's other moments here, like I said, with Jillian Bell's character, or these other characters that Charlie ends up, that Chris ends up, finding, that just really did not end up working for me whatsoever. There's some other characters here that I really just wanted a lot more from. Chris's older daughter has this arc of sorts that I thought was really interesting, but they just didn't really dive into it much, and so I didn't really find myself latching onto it as much as I really wanted to. The Ken Marino's character as well, he is sort of the rival of Chris, and I feel like he was completely underused in this movie. I don't really understand why they didn't do all that much with him. He seemed to be a pretty integral role. They could have easily included him in, I feel like, on this main plan, and they just don't, and it just feels like they don't know what to do with him after they get to a certain point, and so I just found myself very let down by that character as well. There's just a lot of things in this movie that just don't really end up working for me. Tracy Ellis Ross I also usually really like here, but she's not given a lot to do in this movie. She's, yes, a pretty integral part of the film, but it never really feels like she herself has anything to really do. So again, it just kind of feels like a waste here. So yeah, overall, I really just wasn't a huge fan of this one. There definitely are moments that do work here and there, and I do appreciate again just how different this movie's trying to be, but I just didn't really feel it went the extra mile and did what it needed to. By the end, it just really felt very forgettable and just very subpar to me. I think there was a lot more this movie could have done. I think there was a lot more it could have dived into from the backstory and mythology perspective. I also just felt like there was a lot more they could have done. So overall, I was very let down by this one. C for Candy Cane Lane has some good ideas here and there, but overall, really just found this to be very, very much a film of missed potential overall. All right, so Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Christmas Cabin Fever. I have not been enjoying these animated Disney Plus Diary of a Wimpy Kid films very much at all, mainly because they just keep paling in comparison to the much better live action films that they were based upon. They got so much more mileage out of these stories and these characters. They were a lot more effective in what they were trying to do, both from a laugh perspective and from an emotion perspective. They gave us so much more depth and nuance. A lot of the times it just feels very truncated, and so I really was not looking forward to this one at all, but I gotta say, this is the first one that actually sort of won me over. Now, don't get me wrong, there definitely are some things that do bring this one down for sure, but there is quite a bit I did end up liking about this one. One of the things I do definitely want to say is I think the replacement here for Greg of Wesley Kimmel actually does a better job than Brady Noon did. And look, I enjoy Brady Noon as an actor. I just praised him in Family Switch. I think he's a very talented actor for sure. But I just felt like Kimmel really just understood the character of Greg more here. Yes, Greg makes a lot of mistakes, but he always is trying to do the right thing. He does have a genuine arc in this movie, and Kimmel really does bring a lot of heart to this character, and I really did find myself liking him, liking his portrayal of Greg here. I thought he worked really well in this movie. Yes, Greg can be very selfish. Yes, he has a lot of goals of his own, but by the end, he does have this genuine arc. He, seems like he understands the character really well, and I really enjoyed his voice work throughout this movie, and I thought that he ended up working really well here. Spencer Howell as Rowley, I also thought works really well. Rowley has a lot more to do in this one than he has in the previous installment, and I thought it worked really well in this one for sure. And the actual story of what we're going through here, I think really does benefit this film. This film is very simplistic. Greg wants this video game. He's trying to do everything he can to possibly get it. But because of this snowstorm that ends up going down, he's locked in, with his family, and you kind of see their whole sort of dynamic unraveling. And because of that, the movie doesn't feel nearly as rushed as the previous installments. The other films, they're trying to cover so many different points of the year, so many different events that happen to these characters, and a lot of them just feel like we didn't really get the time to dive into it. We don't really get to see, how these characters are being affected. We don't really get to see any of these things play out. But here, things mainly are confined to just a couple key locations, and because of that, the story just feels a lot more cohesive, and I think that absolutely benefits this film. I think that's one of the strongest elements of this movie for sure. There is a plot here, but again, it's very straightforward. It almost feels like a Christmas special in that way, and I actually think that works really well when it comes to this movie. The other characters we have here, there is stuff going on with them. His mom, is trying to just keep the family calm. She wants them to embrace this time they have together, but she also has this weird Elf on the Shelf type doll and things like that that's haunting Greg, and I thought they did some really fun things with her. Manny has quite a bit more to do in this movie, and I thought that worked really well here. Frank as a character, I always do enjoy quite a bit. Roderick still doesn't really work. His portrayal here, they don't really seem to understand what works about this character, and I feel like still Hunter Dillon's performance, it just isn't really quite working for me. It still feels a little bit too mean-spirited for my taste, but they do a little bit more with him here that kind of won me over by the end, but I still can't say I'm 100% into his portrayal. I much prefer what Devin Botstick did, and I feel like there just isn't going to be an actor that can recapture that magic. And I feel like Dylan is just really disappointing in terms of what he's been doing as Roderick so far. Just really has not been sticking out to me much. But again, I think what really works about this one is the fact that we are not familiar with this source material. We have not seen this story covered before. And so because that, it feels a little bit more fresh. It feels a little bit more exciting. And the directions they end up going, I thought were actually really satisfying. There's this really good arc for Greg that happens in the last like 20 minutes of the movie, and I actually thought it was pretty profound where they ended up going with him. His whole turnaround in this movie I liked a lot, and it really did feel like we went on a journey. Those other movies, they felt kind of static in terms of character. It didn't really feel like there was much time they could, devote to the characters because they had to show so much at once. But here they do take a lot more time to kind of center on his sort of dilemma and what he's really going through, but also him kind of learning things about himself and trying to improve. And I thought that worked really well in this movie, and that's something I really did appreciate. There's a genuine sense of heart to this one that I didn't expect either. So yeah, overall, I enjoyed this a lot more than I expected to. It still has some of the same issues as the other ones. A lot of the humor does still fall flat. There are definitely moments that do feel quite rushed. There are certain plot points I would like to see them touch upon a bit more, and I feel like they could have done a better job with. But considering how the other entries were, this is definitely a step in the right direction. I generally was not expecting to like this at all, but by the end, I generally did honestly kind of enjoy it with where they ended up going, and the story they ended up telling here. I thought it did really end up working out. So B- for Die of a Wimpy Kid, Christmas Cabin Fever. By no means a great movie, but compared to the others, it's certainly much better. And if they are to continue to do these, I feel like this is the way to go about it. Don't try to recapture what worked in the live action films. Really just try to do your own thing and cover your own ground. And I feel like they did that here, and that made this that much better overall. Your Christmas or Mine too, I was looking forward to because I enjoyed the first one. I thought that it was, very effective in what it was trying to accomplish. It was very fun, but also had a lot of great insight for these characters and things like that. But by no means was it a film that I thought needed a sequel, and honestly, this film just kind of proved me right. I don't really feel like there's anything this film did to really justify its existence. From the beginning, you can really tell they are trying hard to force conflict. They are trying so hard to try to find a reason for us to still care about these characters and still find a reason to get them in this dilemma, and it just doesn't feel as natural this time around. This time around, we have these two characters and them planning this whole thing where they're going to try to spend time together. Both families in the Australian Alps are going to get to know each other, based on the shared experience that they had in the first film. But once again, they get mixed up at the airport, and because of that, they end up in the wrong hotels and things like that. And it just doesn't quite work as well as the first one. The first one works so well because this is the first time these characters were meeting. They were really getting to know each other. They were finding out different things about their families that, the other had said, and them kind of, learning more about that. And I thought that's what worked so well about the first movie. There was something generally charming and heartfelt about that I thought worked really well. Yes, it was funny to watch, but it had this genuine sense of heart. Here, that's kind of gone because these characters already know each other, so there isn't really a lot that they can do. They try to add some new developments with Jane Krakowski's character, but all her character really amounts to here is just her having this running joke of not understanding British humor or British slang or how British people interact, and it just gets very old after a while. There isn't really a lot of meat to that character, and I was disappointed because I really like Jane Krakowski a lot. I think that when she has the right role, she can really sink her teeth into it and can really end up being like a big scene stealer. But here, it just feels like she wasn't really given that much to work with, and it just feels like they needed like a named actor to insert into this movie, so they brought her in, and that's really all that she ended up contributing, and it just really sucks because I feel like there's a lot more they could have done with her, and it just really didn't end up working. The other characters here, I really couldn't tell you all that much about what they're going through, their sort of dilemmas. There's stuff going on, but it never really feels that essential. And then the characters of James and Haley, I will say, they are absolutely what saves this movie. The chemistry between Asa Butterfield and Cora Kirk, they have a lot more time to interact interact in this one, and because that it really sells you on their chemistry. You see how well these two work together. You really like the charm of both of these characters. There's this dilemma of sorts that they're going through involving James and a big life change that he has, and Haley might not being as privy to that information as she wanted to be, and sort of the fallout of all of that. And that's a really good dilemma for the two of them to go through, and I thought that actually ended up working very well. Unfortunately, the other stuff they do with them in this movie just feels so incredibly forced. There is this whole running sort of thing where James wants to say a certain question to Haley, and things just end up going wrong, and all these different circumstances. You know exactly what's going to happen. You know where this is going to go. You've seen this done 1,000 times before. Really doesn't end up working here. I really just can't stand that trope, and this movie never tries to do anything to overcome it, never tries to do anything different or fresh with it, and it really doesn't end up working. It especially doesn't help when they try to throw his ex-girlfriend in the mix, who really is just here to create conflict. That's the only reason her character's here. She never feels like she has a genuine presence in this movie. She always feels like this plot device of sorts. And again, you know where this movie is going. It's so incredibly predictable, and it just doesn't really end up working at all. So the screenplay just really ends up falling flat this time around. I didn't really find myself latched on to much of anything that was going on here. What really, again, saves it is the charm of these two characters. I still like James and Haley. I enjoy, what they're going through. I enjoy the way they handle their whole arc throughout this movie. I don't enjoy a lot of what they try to do with them, but I enjoy where they end up going in this film and the journey that they end up taking. I think those two characters are still really fun, and I enjoy their overall dynamic in the movie, but unfortunately, I just didn't really find this to be all that compelling. I found it to be very unnecessary, and especially by the time it ended, it really just had me questioning what the point really was of this. The first film, I didn't really hear that many people talk about in the first place. I didn't feel like it was this huge success of sorts. To me, it feels like they just really wanted to recapture the same magic, but they had to make it immediately, and they didn't really have the time to dive into what really worked about that first movie. And so because that, it just feels like a pale imitation of what worked in the first one. There aren't a lot of new ideas here that really make this feel worthwhile, and by the end, I just really was not super into it. It does have some sweet moments here. There are some moments that did get a few laughs out of me, but overall, I really just wasn't that big on this one. So overall, C+ for your Christmas Remind 2. If you enjoyed the first, I think this one is worth watching, but don't really expect it to have that same sort of magic and fun that the first one had. This one just feels a lot more forceful and kind of just played out, and I really just don't feel like they have anything more to... By the end, I just really felt like there really isn't any more water to tread when it comes to these characters. Just a very unnecessary sequel overall. Merry Little Batman is very good. Listen, I went into this not really knowing what to expect because, we've seen so many different iterations of the DC characters at this point that it can definitely feel played out, but this is absolutely the kind of fresh and different kind of approach that we really needed, centering the story on Damian Wayne and him kind of trying to prove to his father that he can still be this hero. He can still, fight crime and things like that. It's generally very fun to watch. He has this motivation of sorts that you really just find yourself latching onto, and I really ended up liking that right off the bat. I think that Damian Wayne is a very compelling character. It also helps that Giannis Khabib is so good in this role. He just brings so much energy and so much life to this, and you really just find yourself latching onto him to where if you had any sort of doubt about Damian Wayne, I think you'll absolutely be on board with the character by the end of this film. I really liked what they end up doing with him here a lot. I think that his whole arc and what he's going through, yes, it's definitely more on the simplistic side than other things we've seen, but there's a little bit more going on with him beyond the surface. He isn't quite aware of, what his father has really been involved in. He knows, obviously, yes, he's Batman, but he doesn't know the full extent of what's gone on and really how to how to kind of take up the mantle. And I really enjoyed watching that throughout this film. It was really great to see. And again, I think he is just so good in this movie. Luke Wilson is a very good Bruce Wayne. He's not in the movie a ton, although they do find a really clever way to still have him be in the majority of the film that I thought worked really well. I wasn't sure how well it was going to work for me, but I actually ended up liking it a lot. It ended up providing some of the funniest moments in the entire movie, and I really enjoyed what he ended up doing here. And I know this is going to be a television series. This is going to follow into a show called Bat Family. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but I really hope they keep him as Bruce Wayne, because he is very good as this character, and I really enjoy the bond that we get between him and Damian respectively. I think those two just work really well together. James Cromwell is good as Alfred, although he really doesn't have a ton to do here. A lot of this is just him kind of just being the butler, but also kind of just referencing sort of things, and also having this, there's a portion of the movie where he's really not in it all that much, and he does have some fun moments here or there, but I didn't really feel like he had a ton to do, but I feel like in the show he'll probably have a lot more. But here it was kind of more of a brief role than anything. David Hornsby, though, as the Joker is so good. This is such a different type of interpretation of the Joker than we've seen before, and I really liked it a lot. Without getting into it too much, the Joker in this is basically like the Grinch. He has this motivation that is not like anything we've seen before with the Joker, but it worked really well. And if this is the direction they're taking him, I am very much on board with it, and I'm very excited to see what they end up doing from here on out. So yeah, I really just enjoyed all the voice performances in this movie. I thought the directing by Mike Roth was just really great here. It's very fun. It's very vibrant. I really enjoy the fun that he brings to this movie. But again, he also brings a lot of heart to this film. There is a lot that is riding on Damian Wayne. He's constantly being told he's too young. He doesn't know what he's getting himself into. And seeing the direction he ends up going in, and, how he's trying to prove to everybody, again, it's just really great to see, and I think Roth just did a really good job of towing that line between humor, which at points is very much satirizing aspects of Batman that I wasn't expecting them to, and I thought that worked really well. There was one joke in particular that really got me involving the Joker, and I thought it worked just really well in this film. But also the screenplay, like I said, is just rock solid here. I really thought they established everything very well in this film. I thought all the setup was really great, and the way they tie Christmas into it, it doesn't feel forceful. It feels organic. It feels natural. It's a good way to kind of ease us into this story, and I thought they did do a really good job with that. The animation as well, I really like the style of this. It's very different stylistically than any other Batman show we've gotten, and that's really what kind of makes it stick out, and it really does end up working. It's very colorful, it's very creative, and I really enjoyed a lot of the animation that was done here. So overall, there really is a lot to like about this one. There's some good action sequences here and there. I enjoyed the score that was in this. I think the only thing that does bring it down for me is some of the characters, like I said, we just didn't really get a ton with. I wanted to see more of James Cromwell as Alfred, but he really didn't leave that big of an impression on me, because he's just not in the movie all that much. What he has, he's good, but I feel like I'm hoping that they give him a lot more to do in the show, because here it just felt like he wasn't really given a ton to do in this movie, and I felt like they could have dived into him a little bit more. There are other aspects here that I really wanted to see more of, but I feel like all these things that I'm kind of unsure about, they will eventually be dived into, or at least I hope they're dived into within the show. So it is kind of hard to talk about flaws within this movie, because those can easily be improved upon within the television show. But as a movie, there definitely are some things that I think they could have done a lot better. There are some aspects that do feel a little bit rushed, but overall, I thought this was just such a rock solid introduction to what could end up being just a really strong, new sort of phase for Batman in this new iteration of sorts that I really did find myself getting behind. I feel like things like this and My Adventures with Superman, it's finding new and different ways to tell these stories and different, things they can do with them, and it's keeping these properties feel fresh and exciting. It's showing us what makes these characters so great in the first place, and I really hope this is another example of how they are able to continue to do that. So yeah, I really did did enjoy this quite a bit. B for Merry Little Batman. It's definitely much different than I was expecting, but I really did enjoy it quite a bit. And the last movie we're talking about, before, like I said, we do transition into the show that I'll be talking about with Allie, that is The Sacrifice Game. This is another horror movie from Shudder, but this one I actually liked quite a bit more. It starts off and you think you know where it's going to go. It very much feels like it's this typical sort of invasion film. You know, you have these four older sort of college students. They're breaking into this this all-girls boarding school, and it seems like they're going to hold them hostage, and you think you know exactly what's going to happen. You know, we've centered on these two other girls and the bond that they end up forming, and you think you know exactly where the film is going, but then it takes a bit of a turn, and once it goes there, it really becomes something a lot more interesting than that. The way this film is diving into what these characters are trying to accomplish and what's really going on, it flips the script in a really interesting way, and that's something that really did end up impressing me here. But it is the kind of film where you need to know as little as possible going into it, because I think if you know anything, it's not going to be quite as effective. And I think, you know, knowing the direction it takes now, it really does it really does help a lot of this film as a whole, and I think there's a lot of things that it does do really well. From an acting perspective, I mean, I think all the acting is really good here. Mina Masad, honestly, has never been better as the character of Jude. He is so incredibly, like, demanding and confident in this role. Jude is someone who wants so badly to be in control. He'll do anything he can to make it happen, and he just really ends up working here. I always knew he had it in him. He had a few shaky roles in the beginning, but I really do think he is coming into his own as an actor, and this is, like I said, probably the best performance I've seen from him. Olivia Scott Welch has always impressed me, and I think she gives another really strong performance here. Maisie's a character that kind of starts off one way and then veers off in a completely different direction, and I thought that all through, she just gave a very well-rounded performance, and I really liked what she ended up doing. Gus Kenworthy's very good here. You know, I really enjoyed his performance. Derek Johns as Grant, I thought also was very strong, but maybe the strongest performance of them all actually comes from Georgia Akin as Clara, who starts off and she's this, you know, friend of sorts to basically the main character of this movie in Samantha, but really ends up becoming much more integral than you think she's going to, and she just gives such a strong performance here. I've never really seen her in anything before, but my god, she really blew me away in this movie, especially towards the third act of this film. I thought she was just really great to watch here. So I thought all the performances were very strong here. The directing from Jen Wexler is very creative with where it ends up going. Like I said, it kind of makes you feel comfortable with where the movie's going, and you kind of expect it to go in this predictable direction. So when it eventually does do this heel turn of sorts, it feels that much more inspired, because it's like, oh, okay, this is what we were setting up all along. This is not the kind of movie I thought we were watching. We're actually going in a different direction, and it made the film that much stronger, in my opinion. I really like the ideas that she's trying to tackle in this movie. I think the ideas of, you know, temptation and identity and things like that, those are things this movie is diving into, and it does a really good job when it comes to all of that. I think that, you know, her directing was very strong in this film. The screenplay as well, I do think, was really good here. They do a good job of giving motivations to all of these characters and how they've gotten to this point, what they're really trying to accomplish. I think all of that is really good here. I think all the, you know, decisions these characters end up making are pretty well fleshed out for the most part. Aside from a couple characters, there is this teacher that is introduced early on in the film, and I just felt like we didn't get enough with her character. Chloe Levine is good in the movie, but I just want a little bit more with her, as well as Gus Kentworthy's character. I didn't feel like there was enough with either of them, and I felt like they could have dived a bit deeper into some things. Also, as much as I do enjoy the invaders in this movie, while it takes a long time for us to fully get into their motivations for what they're really doing, and I felt like they could have done a little bit of a better job of diving into some of that, because some of it just feels a little bit rushed, and I think that does bring the movie down. And as far as the ending goes, the ending does not at all go in the direction that I was expecting it to, and I really do appreciate the film for, you know, going to those places. I just wish they gave us a little bit more time to kind of digest the choice that ends up being made in this movie. Give us maybe 10, 15 more minutes to kind of soak in everything, because while, yes, the twist is very effective, we do just kind of rush right into it. And I wish we had a little bit more time to fully process things, especially towards the end of this movie. I think there's a little bit more they could have dived into, but for what this is, I think it's extremely effective in what it accomplishes. The Christmas setting also works really well. This movie definitely needed to be done during Christmas. It definitely does feel pretty integral to the overall story. So yeah, I mean, I really like this one quite a bit. If you're looking for a very different kind of horror movie, I think this is definitely one that is going to impress you. So definitely a B for The Sacrifice Game. Very different movie than what I thought I was getting into, but one that I thoroughly enjoyed overall. All right, so a bit of an awkward transition, as you can see. We go from me talking about, a bunch of Christmas movies from this year to finally getting the chance to talk about a show that I was planning to talk about in the Christmas video last year that never ended up happening. And so I figured, you know what, didn't talk about it then, might as well talk about it now. And, I have Allie with me, which is always amazing, which,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of works out because back when I was going to do that video, you hadn't watched this season. Now you have watched this season. And so Santa Claus we're talking about that. That's the show, as you can see in the background here. I'll just give my background and say that the Santa Claus has always been a very important part of Christmas for me. It's always been like my essential, for a long time, like my essential Christmas films. Like it was like the trilogy I always watch, even though I'm not really big on the third one. I still always found myself like watching the first three a lot. They're definitely some of my favorite Christmas movies, especially the first two. Always go-tos for me. I just really appreciate the charm and the fun that they have, but I also really appreciate the I also really appreciate the heart, and I think they're very relatable. They have a lot of creative ideas. And so, when I heard they had this show coming out, I was really excited to see how it was going to be. I was like, okay, there's a lot you can do here. You can really kind of expand the lore a little bit and kind of delve into, what is really going on with Scott after all these years, and then maybe slowly start to, introduce some characters from the movies and things like that. I understood they kind of had to start small, but I was really pulling for this show, and it's not very good. I really was not that big on this at all. Now, we're going to talk about season 1 and 2 individually, because honestly, I think they have completely separate issues, and I don't think it makes sense to talk about season 1 and 2 like as one, because they're both so different in that way. But before I give my brief thoughts, what was your expectations coming into the show?
So I've always been like a huge fan of the original movies.
Yeah.
Especially the second one. That's my favorite. I don't even dislike the first or third. Like I love all of them, but definitely
First is the best in my opinion.
The second one is my favorite. I just love that one so much. It's just like very wholesome, very fun, very silly, funny, and they're just like very just feel good, heartwarming movies that you watch during Christmas time, and just like you can watch them with your family, your friends, significant others, anything. And I just I grew up watching them. Like the second one for sure. The first one I've only seen I haven't seen as much. Obviously, and then the third one I've seen a few times. So definitely the second one. It's not just my favorite; it's the one I've seen the most. And I was 9 when it came out. I was actually when they came out, I was 1, 9, and the third one was 2006, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I was 13. So 1, 9, and 13. And they're just really they're just movies I've grew up with, so they mean a lot to me, especially that second one. And then obviously going into the show, I was excited. I was obviously a little worried because I'm like, I don't know if it's going to be as good.
Especially the track record with revivals recently, not being the greatest.
Yeah, revivals are very iffy.
Very hit or miss.
Very hit or miss. So it's Obviously, I didn't have high expectations going into the show.
Mhm.
I was excited just to like see that like thing that I grew up with, to see it
Yeah.
come back for a show, like to see like Scott and Carol and all them again. But it's definitely like not as good, I will say. It's definitely, yeah, this show, ugh. Um, season one, I literally last year, I only watched the first two episodes, or
I think literally just the first one.
I think I watched the first two and then like part of three, and then and that's it.
Yeah.
Um, and then so I had to go back and rewatch it, restart it, because obviously I didn't really remember much. So obviously I finished season one this year, and then we watched season two together.
Yeah.
But yeah, honestly, overall the show is not that great.
Yeah, so I'll give my thoughts on season one, and obviously we're not going to go like full spoilers or anything because I don't want this whole video to turn into just a review of the Santa Clauses. I feel like that's just not a disservice to this video. Also, I don't want to be talking about this longer than I talked about the holdovers. So out of respect for the holdovers, in which go see that movie if you haven't, it's amazing. Also, Allie,
Me
please see that
too.
movie; it's incredible. Out of respect for that, I will try to give my brief thoughts. So season one, I think, does have some really good ideas right off the bat. The things that work in the show. Tim Allen is still great as Scott. He gets right back into the character. He still has the wit. He still has the fun that character has. He still does a good job with all of that. Same with Elizabeth Mitchell. Like, they both get into these roles very well, I think, and they do a good job of recapturing the magic. Unfortunately, the material that they're given, it's just really not that great. And the biggest issue with season one for me is it just doesn't really have enough going on. It is very simplistic with what it's trying to do. It's literally just Scott wants to retire. He's thinking about doing so. He does end up retiring. And as you see in the trailer for season one, something happens where he retires too soon and he has to then come back and like try to make it all right again. And the issue that I really have with it is that it's very similar to a story we've seen done before in the Santa Claus 2, where it's like, Santa, he doesn't completely retire, obviously, but he does have to, step out for a little bit to go pursue Carol and whatnot. And then, you have fucking robot Santa, which that is the reason I don't love that one as much as the first, is the fucking robot Santa shit. But you have AI Santa basically taking over and trying to destroy everything. And this one has something very similar to that. And to me, when you have a show that's taken this long to come out, the fact that they're still kind of retreading similar, like just kind of treading similar beats that they did in the first three movies, it's just really unfortunate to see, because I feel like there's so much potential with this story, but they just focused on the least interesting things in season one. Other things you have going on here is you have, that's obviously like the main arc going on, but you also have the new characters of Cal and Sandra, and nothing against the actors. I do think they try their best. They definitely, especially Austin Kane as Cal, like he's definitely trying. They want him so badly to be like the comedic relief of the show, but I just do not care about this character whatsoever. He really is just like the very simple-minded son of the two of them. He has like very like basic goals for what he wants to accomplish, and Scott for some reason like wants him to be the next Santa and things like that. And I just could not for the life of me get invested in this character. They take him in this direction that just completely feels random and feels like they don't know what to do with him. And this is an issue with both seasons for me. I just feel like they don't know what to do with this character. He's here to kind of just be like a joke machine and say the most outlandish things, and I just don't really care about him. He doesn't have a lot of depth. He doesn't have a lot of layers to him. And the thing is, like, and not to say that I wanted this all to be about Scott and Charlie. That's not what I wanted. But the thing that worked so well about Charlie is he just felt like a normal kid. yes, he definitely, you know, wasn't the most like developed character, but in Santa Claus 2, when he's messing things up, when he's causing all these, when he's having all these issues in school, when he's, you know, vandalizing property, you completely get behind what he's doing. You understand his motivation, and it makes him feel that much more three-dimensional. This is why I don't like Lucy in Santa Claus 3. She doesn't feel like a real person to me. She just feels like this saint that's just always going to do the right thing. Charlie always felt flawed in that way, and Cal is just such a one-note character. He's just here to be silly and goofy, and I'm just not really here for that. I didn't really get attached to him. And on the other hand, we have Sandra, who this season, they really just don't know what to do with her. They eventually go in this direction with her where she has some kind of abilities of sorts, and that's kind of interesting, but they don't really delve into it in this first season. And so she's just kind of here. There isn't really a lot to latch onto, but they focus a lot on her, and there just isn't really a lot going on with her character in this first season, and that really does bring it down for me. So those two characters are so integral to the story, and they just don't know what to do with either of them. There's other new characters here, the head elves of Betty and Noel. I also just don't find myself caring about. Betty is just a weaker version of Bernard, pretty much, where you know, she's like freaking out constantly and she's always worried about what's going to happen. And look, I love Matilda Lawler. If you have not seen Station 11, watch that immediately. She is incredible in that, and I really hope she continues to get more work. But this character is so bland. Like, all she's here to do is just constantly be, you know, stressed out about what's going to happen. She's, you know, trying to be the best possible head elf that she can be. And I just don't find her interesting at all. I don't think, you know, the way they dived into her, you know, over these 2 seasons, she doesn't really interest me. Noel is a little bit more interesting, but you never buy the fact that him and Santa have the relationship that they do. They're supposed to be like best friends in that way. And I just don't really buy into it because I just don't feel they sell it very well. So again, it's really just the new characters here are just not super interesting, and they play such a major role in this show, and that really just brings this whole thing down. And then on the other hand of it, you know, you have this plot line that, like I said, it's just very simplistic, but yet it also feels like there's too much happening. There's only 6 episodes this season, and a major part of the season should be seeing Scott retiring, seeing Scott settle into his new life. And that happens in 1 episode this season. We really don't ever get the chance to see him actually, you know, contemplate whether being Santa is a good idea or not. It happens in 1 episode, and then immediately he's, you know, and that it happens in like 1 episode, and then immediately something happens and he has to get pulled back into it. And it just feels very disappointing. It feels like we don't get enough time to see him really settle into that choice. And I feel like having 6 episodes just really does the disservice to this show. So it really just doesn't end up working at all. I think the only saving grace of this season for me, besides, again, how much I do enjoy seeing the characters of Scott and Carol back, and they also do an okay job of paying homage to certain characters. We get to see Charlie for an episode, and I enjoyed what they did with him. We get to see Bernard eventually. I enjoy what they do with him. There's a really good episode kind of expanding the lore of what they call the Yuleverse and kind of diving more into what really happened. And that to me is the only like truly good episode of this show. That's the only time I felt like they were doing something interesting, and I really like what they were trying to do there. But beyond that, the only other thing that really invested me in this season are the characters of Simon and Grace. I thought these characters were actually pretty strong. They have a little side story going on of their own. Simon ends up being a pretty important part of this season, and Cal Penn plays that character very well. Where they end up going with him, I wasn't quite expecting. It was a little bit different than what they've done before, and I really thought that they honestly do end up being the heart of this season, especially the character of Grace. You really like her a lot. She brings out the best in her father. They're going through a similar they're going through a tragedy of their own of sorts. You can kind of see the way that they're coping through that. And I found their scenes to be among the strongest of the entire show. And if they were the main focus, I honestly think this show would be a lot better because I enjoyed their characters a lot this season. And I thought anytime they come back to them, I enjoyed the show infinitely more. But even their stuff still feels rushed. It feels like where they end up going from episode 1 to episode 6, it just doesn't feel as natural as it should. It feels like this absolutely needs to be like a 10 episode or 13 episode season. And it just feels like that really ends up holding back the show. So yeah, those are really my thoughts on season 1. Also the fact that humor-wise, this show is so much more geared towards kids than the movies were. I'm not saying that the movies didn't eventually get a little bit more childish as they went on, but the humor here, it's very much more for like a younger audience. But the thing is, I don't feel like the younger audience is who's going to watch the show. The people who are going to watch the show are people like us who grew up with the movies and watched them a lot as kids. So I just feel like the target audience is just kind of all wrong here. There are occasional moments that made me laugh here and there, but for the most part, especially this season, I really can't recall a time I laughed all that much. I found a lot of the humor to just fall very flat for me. The effects also are horrendous in this show. I understand it's a TV budget, but like you compare what we had in the movies to this, it just really feels like a downgrade. Even the look of the North Pole just looks a lot cheaper here. As they're expanding it and things like that, it just seems like they're not fully taking advantage of the opportunities they have. So yeah, overall, it's just a really big disappointment of a first season. It does have some interesting ideas here and there, but for the most part, it just really left me feeling underwhelmed by the end. There were definitely things I enjoyed about this season, but everything I liked, there was something I didn't like. I do think the way it wraps up was overall pretty satisfying, but what it took to get there, by the end, it just felt kind of unnecessary. It felt like, why did we really need this? What did this really bring to this franchise that the movies didn't? And aside from a couple things that I mentioned, really not much. And that's what's very disappointing about this show. So yeah, overall, not really big fan of this first season. C+ overall. Really was hoping this would be good, but it just didn't really end up working.
Yeah, so obviously when I restarted it, I didn't hate this season overall, but like,
No, I don't either.
like it definitely had cute and funny moments, but I do think the funniest things are probably with like Scott and like Carol and all them, and like, and obviously, yeah, Simon and Grace are really great characters, and their story is just very like heartwarming and and everything like that. So yeah, I really for like what?
I said they're the only good characters this season.
Honestly. So yeah, like their story and those characters were actually like really good for new characters because we actually like really know more about them. Yeah, I'm kind of like hit or miss with like the elves. Like I don't dislike them, but I also don't really love them either.
They're just bland.
Yeah, they just don't really have like a lot to them. They're just very basic, very simple.
Yeah.
Just don't really have much. Like I prefer like the elves and everything and all the other and all those characters like in the movies.
Bring back my boy Curtis. Come on. Just
bring back Curtis. Bring back Bernard for more episodes and
bring back Aisha Tyler. What does she have going on right now? Bring her back.
I know. And obviously, like, I'm glad we got to see Charlie for an episode, but I do wish he was in more because he's a king. I would love to see him like actually go to the North Pole again, just to kind of like rehash and everything.
Yeah, when they announced that he was gonna be like back on the show, I had assumed that he was gonna have a pretty large like a large role this season, and without getting into it, he really doesn't.
No, he doesn't.
He's in one episode, and it is not for very long. So don't expect to be too excited over seeing Charlie. He's not here much.
I know, because he was a king. Love him. And
great character.
Yeah, Cal and Sandra, like, I don't dislike them, but yeah, Cal is just, like, the dumb son, but also, and he doesn't, like, he's very ditzy, but he also doesn't really have much to him. He's just, like, he's just a basic teenager, really.
Yeah.
And then Sandra, she's sweet, but she doesn't really have a lot this season either. She's just kind of there. Like, season 1, yeah, she doesn't really have much at all.
I don't even remember what her arc was in season 1.
Yeah. just like she's literally just the daughter. She's just there.
Yeah.
And then I mean obviously Tim Allen and Elizabeth Mitchell, they're just great all around. Like sometimes I mean obviously sometimes Carol didn't really have a lot to do either, but I still enjoyed her. Like
This
obviously
season she has a little bit more, especially
yeah.
in I did forget to mention this. They do a little bit more showing like Carol's like life before she joined the North Pole. But again, it wasn't enough. Like everything they do that's good, it's not enough.
Exactly. So yeah, but obviously Tim Allen and Elizabeth Mitchell, they have like very good chemistry and very genuine chemistry. So they work very well together. Love seeing them like after all these years, after the second movie, that they're still together and everything. So obviously love their scenes and everything. Obviously Tim Allen's just great because he fits the role super well. But yeah, overall, like character-wise, I think the only ones who were really good were Scott, Carol, Simon, and Grace. Everyone else was just very hit or miss. But this season I definitely preferred over season one. Or over season two. Just because there was actually like more moments that I enjoyed more and didn't really think.
We'll get into season two in a little bit, but
like yes, there were some dumb and stupid moments, but I still preferred it over season two. And yeah, obviously that one episode that you really liked is also the one I really liked too. And then episode 1 wasn't awful, and the ending wasn't terrible, but definitely just a very iffy show. A lot of some good things, some bad things, or iffy things, but overall probably a C+. I can't go higher than a C+.
Okay, so now we're gonna get into season 2, and I'll be honest, I never the one thing I will definitely say about the show is I never expected that this show would be renewed, because the reception to it in season 1 was just so like a resounding just like nobody really seemed to care that much about it. I didn't really hear anybody talk about it. If I did, it was people watched the first few episodes, weren't impressed, and then just kind of bailed. So I never expected for this show to get a second season, but it did. And I was really hoping that they would kind of take the criticisms from season 1 and try to expand upon it. They now had time to kind of figure out what the show is really going to be and really try to kind of like, you know, finite what worked in those in those few moments in the show, but also remember what worked in the movies. And I will say, when this season started, it seemed like they were starting to do that. They were starting to recognize more of what the show can really be. How can we delve deeper into things? And they do make an attempt to do that this season. But again, I'm going to put emphasis on the word attempt. They attempt to do things this season. The way things start out does seem promising. It seems a bit more focused. It seems like there is more of an emphasis on the family. You know, it's very clear this season, a lot of it's going to focus on the bickering between Scott, you know, Carol, Sandra, Cal, a lot of the bickering between the four of them and them trying to like work out their differences. That is a good setup. There is, you know, once again, more of an emphasis on developing, especially the character of Sandra a little bit more. And this is the one thing I do think this season does do a little bit better. I did find myself liking Sandra more this season. They delve deeper into sort of what she's all about, what she's able to do. And I felt that overall she was just a more compelling character this season. And I did enjoy watching her more. But again, listen to how I'm using the word attempt. And that's because aside from a few things, this season is such a fucking mess of a show. Like, they really did everything. I feel like season 1, they wanted to make it as like safe as possible. And so they picked just like a really easy story to start out with and just kind of went from there. But they never expected for the show to continue. So then what they did was they thought, okay, what are the craziest ideas we can do with the show? What is the most insane stuff we can do? All right, let's do that, but let's also do this, and then let's also do this, and let's do all of it at once and not try to have any of it feel coherent, not try to have any of it feel like it it fits into the context of the show and feel like there's like 5 different shows going on, because that's literally what this season is. If season 1 was too simple, this season is too much. Like there's so much happening this season, and so little of it I actually find myself caring about. Like I said, the stuff with Sandra, I actually do like. It's furthering her character. We have a little bit more between her and the character of La Befana, who I didn't really like in season 1, but I liked her more this season. I enjoyed their dynamic. I thought it was pretty good for the two of them. I like what they do with her. But when they're not doing that, we have yet the same story of season 1 with Scott trying to train Cal and him thinking that Cal would be a good fit to be Santa. And not only do they do a worser job at that in this season, but they never give any real indication of why Scott feels this way. Is this something that Scott wants him to do, or is this something that Scott kind of feels like he has to do? They kind of dive into it a little bit, but Scott really doesn't have like a well-defined arc this season. It kind of feels like he's stuck in the same story, and they don't really know what to do with him beyond that. And that really sucks, because I do think there is at least an attempt to do something different here, but it's just not different enough. It's way too similar to what they did in the first season, and it just feels kind of like recycled ideas from that season when it comes to that particular plot line. I don't think they did a great job with that at all here. I was very let down by the direction they went with that this season. Cal, once again, is a character that they clearly just don't know what to do with. He's stuck in the same kind of story this season, and especially what they choose to focus on. I'm like, this is what we're doing with this character? Like, out of everything you could possibly do, this is the story you decide to go with? It's literally the most bland, cookie cutter Disney Channel shit you have ever seen. Like, if you were to watch this show on the Disney Channel, it would be because of Cal's storyline. Like, literally, it is so incredibly boring, and it is easily one of my least favorite aspects of the season for sure. I really just don't like this character. I don't think they know what they want to do with this character. Just really not working at all here. So that really ended up bringing this down for me. But then there's the other portion of this season. And look, I will give this show credit for trying to do something different. They do make an attempt to dive a lot deeper into the mythology and the lore of the Yuleverse, and what's been going on in the North Pole all these years ago. And they try to do something really different, and something that this show has not attempted before. But here's the thing: if you're going to try to do something different, you really kind of have to like give us time to settle into it, and give us time to like really establish what you're trying to do. Because instead they dive full force into it, and it just feels weird. It just feels off from the show. And I don't want to get into it too much, but the character of Magnus Antis, now I will say, Eric Stonestreet, very good in this role, perfectly cast. He is very fun to watch at points. I think he does a really good job portraying just the anger, but also the determination of this character, that he's out for revenge and things like that. Like, he does a good job with that. But the material he's given is easily some of the worst stuff in this entire season. First of all, what they decide to do with him, there's so much potential with this character. He's supposed to be like the most powerful Santa that's ever existed. He's supposed to be the Santa that like went rogue, and this like the Mad Santa and things like that. And most of the season, he's confined to one location. He's interacting with the same characters. He's like, going on and on about the same stuff. And it feels like this is yet another character. They don't have the time to do what they want to with him. And it's like, why did you even introduce this other thing if you're not even going to try to expand upon it? They dive a lot deeper into the lore of the elves, and that's great. But again, it just feels rushed. There's one episode especially that literally feels like fucking Game of Thrones or something like that, with the direction they decide to go in. It was just so weird, and I'm like, what the hell am I watching? Like, what is this show trying to do? What is the point of any of this? And honestly, where they decided to go with it, I couldn't really tell you what the point of it was. I feel like they were trying to do something different. And again, I appreciate them for trying to do different and exciting things with the show. but when you're doing it at the speed that you are this season, it just becomes disorienting, and it just really has me checking out. I'm not interested in what's going on when you're not really explaining to me what's going on, and you're not doing a good job of really laying out what's going on. There's this character, Chris, they have this season, and I like Gabriel Iglesias a lot, and I think he could have been one of the bright spots of this season, but his entire arc is pretty much just told to us. We don't really see anything with him. We don't really get any follow-up with him. It just feels like this is another character they don't know what to do with. He's just kind of here. They need to do something with him because they like Gabriel Iglesias and they wanted to add him to the show. Like, again, they don't know what to do with this character, and it really does show throughout the entirety of this season. So there's just a lot of stuff here that they're clearly trying to do. There's so much they're trying to juggle. It just feels convoluted. Then you have Betty and Noel, who Betty is barely in this season, and I get why. Matilda Lawler is a very busy actress, but there is a subplot going on with her that I feel like they could have easily cut back to every so often, and they just kind of chose not to, and I don't understand that. You could have still reduced her character development, just reduced her character, but just have her in at least every few episodes, and I think that would have felt much more satisfying than just having her in the beginning and not having her again until like the end. I felt like it was just kind of weird to have that gap where she's just not really there. And then Noel, they're trying to do this arc with him where they're trying to focus on what is, can he really focus without Betty? Can he really survive without her and things like that? And again, it just doesn't really work when we don't really have the time to tell that story to its fullest potential. So again, the biggest issue with this season is a couple things. One, the lack of focus. There's so much going on, so little of it is connecting. They all kind of feel like separate shows. Even Carol has this story with the character Gary, who I do not give a shit about, and I don't understand why the show is so like obsessed with him. He's such a one joke. He's like, oh, I'm just the quirky elf. Like that's literally his character. There's really nothing that interesting with him, but that's all they really seem to do with her this season. Carol has literally nothing to do this entire season. There's really no arc of her own, and it's very disappointing because I think Elizabeth Mitchell is a very talented actress and she clearly has a lot of passion for the show, but it just seems like they're not really giving her much to work with here. So again, just the plethora of storylines, but then also, again, the length of the season. There's only 6 episodes here, and they just are doing way too much for 6 episodes. They really needed, and I thought for sure with how season 1 went, they would do like 10 or 13 episodes this season, but instead they are reducing themselves to just 6, and it's actively hurting the show. It robs them of so much storytelling. It robs them of so much creative ideas, so much forward momentum. I mean, momentum just isn't a thing this season. Things just kind of happen. Things just suddenly are important, and it just doesn't feel cohesive in the slightest. So there's just a lot that really annoyed me here. I will say the finale was actually pretty satisfying, the way things wrapped up. There were some ideas that I actually did kind of like, but I would be lying if I said that I enjoyed this season. A lot of the time, I was just very confused on what they were trying to do. I didn't understand why they chose to tell this specific story in the way that they did. I thought they started off with so much potential, but just like season 1, just completely lost sight of it. And while it did get better in the end, I think it's really just because of the way they decided to wrap things up. It still doesn't change the fact that this was such a unsatisfying and deeply confusing season that just seemed to have no idea what it really wanted to do. It was trying to do so much at once, and by the end, it just felt so unclear what the show is really trying to accomplish. And I would be lying if I said I would be fine if I would like to see more of the show. I'm honestly fine if the show does not come back. It's really not working for me at all. So yeah, I like this season, honestly, even less than season 1, which I was surprised about because I thought it actually started off kind of promising. But C for season 2, very disappointing. I thought it started off really strong, has some interesting ideas, but my God, it just did not know what to do with the majority of them.
Yeah, oh my God, this season was kind of rough to get through. It was like really just, it was super messy, convoluted, and just like all the storylines didn't mesh just together. Like this show, this season definitely needed like 13 episodes, or 10.
And like hour-long episodes, not 30 minutes.
Yeah, like maybe like 40 minutes at least or something.
Yeah.
But like 8, 10, or 13 episodes would have been so much better.
No.
I mean, I will say I did actually really like Sandra this season. I liked her
Yeah.
story.
She was the best part of the season.
Oh yeah, she was definitely probably one of the best parts of the season for sure. And like I like her friendship with La Befana. Like they are just very genuine and heartfelt, and like La Befana takes her under her wing. Cal didn't his storyline just oh my god, he just did not have much of a storyline again. He's literally just still like that dumb teenager who also is just who literally like having a girlfriend is like his only like main storyline.
Yeah, that's all they do with him.
Like Riley's cool, I guess, but she's just there. Like we don't really know anything about her.
Who even is she? That's the thing.
Yeah,
like
she's a fine character, I guess. I just wish I knew more about her. She's just kind of there, and she's just like a whatever character. The elves, they're okay, but again, like they're just very bland, don't have much to them. Like I prefer the people on the movie. And Carol, she didn't really have much to do at all. She was still like Elizabeth Mitchell was amazing as her role, of course, and like she does have a lot of passion, but she just didn't really do much this season. Obviously Scott's a great character always, just because he is the lead. So I mean, he always has stuff to do. He's always great and everything. But his storyline wasn't always perfect either. But yeah, overall, like pretty weak season. Like it had like some good moments and ideas. There were some things I didn't dislike, but I didn't really laugh a lot. Just very like honestly. Some of the funniest things really are, like I said before, like the funniest things sometimes are just like bicker between like or banter between like Scott and Carol. But yeah, the finale was actually pretty good. It
was.
Like there was definitely some okay promising moments, but wasn't as strong as season 1. Also bring back more for Charlie. Also bring back my girl Lucy and Abby, the Coco girl, remember from season 2? Bring her back too, Queen. Just bring back all them because they'd make this show so much more interesting. I won't be surprised if it's not picked up, but I mean, it might. Who knows? I could see it being picked up just because. I mean, everyone loves the movies, but like I don't. But I can also see the show being canceled because it's not very great. Like no one really.
And who's watching this show? That's the thing. Like I didn't hear anyone talk about season 2.
Like most of the serialized reviews are all like negative, or just not very high ratings. But I feel like people just watch for like the nostalgia.
Yeah.
So I could see the only reason it being picked up is that. But if they do have a season 3, hoping it's longer and they actually like, with all these storylines, just like it'll balance out way better in like more episodes than just 6 because they were literally trying to do too much. And then obviously find better storylines for certain people like Cal,
they really were.
And I did. Oh my god, Olga was so annoying. I did not like that character.
Oh god, I forgot to talk about her. She was horrible.
She's just really freaking annoying. Every time she was on the screen, like as an actress, fine. Just her character, just no. I just was very annoyed anytime she came on the screen, and her like she just feels like she's so over the top. Like no thanks.
Yeah, just very, very irritating character.
Oh yeah, like frustrating.
Oh, the one other thing we forgot to mention, there is literally a portion of this season that takes place during Easter, and I don't know who decided to make that decision, but it was not a good one because it does not work. It does not work.
Not at all. Like there's a lot of things in this that are very questionable. I do miss Simon and Grace. Bring them back at some point if they do come back.
Yeah.
Just bring back a lot of the good characters and. It'd be so much better. And like I didn't hate the season overall. Like it has some okay ideas, but overall it's definitely weaker and worse than season 1. I cannot go higher than SC.
With that, guys, that is it. Those are all of the Christmas movies and shows I will be talking about. It was a lot of fun getting to do this again. Like I said, I didn't get to do this last year, and I always enjoy getting to do these videos, so I'm very happy that I was able to get to do it again for this one. Of course, definitely want to thank Allie for covering the Santa Clauses with me. Always really enjoy having her on my channel. Check out Conversation with Kelly if you haven't. We did a lot of reality podcasting this year. We're going to be doing the finale of Big Brother Reindeer Games very soon, the surprise show of the year for me in terms of reality television, so definitely look forward to that. But yeah, other than that, that's pretty much it for this video. Like I said, I know I'm very behind on videos, and I'm going to try to do what I can to just try to be a bit more consistent. And this is really my attempt to do so, and I hope I am able to do so more, within the next few months or so, with all the plethora of stuff that I need to get done. But it will happen. It will be happening, and I will try to deliver as much as I possibly can on that front. But with that said, like I said, hope you all had a nice and safe holiday. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, comment down below. Let me know what you thought of any of these movies or show whatsoever. Love to your thoughts on all of that. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.